Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's just afternoon, and first I will start by saying the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. With that, I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of conflict. Seeing none, I'll move to the consent items. Are there any items that members would like pulled?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to pull 2.5. Everything else is fine, although I have a couple of comments on the other consent items.
Okay, anything else? So the chair is going to do something a little bit odd. I'm going to pull a few things just because I would like to hear staff comment on a number of items, and I just think it would be cleaner to do that. So at this point, I'm looking for some information or general comments on 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. So that leaves 2.4, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, and I'm looking for a mover on those. Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Hillier. So we'll put those on the floor. Councillor Lewis, do you have comments on 2.4, 2.6, 7, or 8?
I do actually on 2.7, Madam Chair, and I also just want to say thank you for pulling those ones around housing because I had questions about those too, but it'll be cleaner to do it that way, I think. I just want to commend staff for moving ahead with the administrative monetary penalty bylaw changes. This is going to be a really important tool, I think, in our toolbox, particularly around the problems that I know I have in my ward, and I know that many of my colleagues have as well, with illegal parking in school zone areas that are creating some significant hazards, and being able to go to a more automated penalty system, I think will help relieve some of the pressures we have in those neighborhoods. So I just want to thank staff for their work in bringing that forward.
Anybody else? Seeing none, we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, committee. So we have a number of consent items pulled, and I'm suggesting rather than start with those consent items, we might start with our delegations rather than have them sit and wait while we go through all of the consent items. So we'll go straight to the scheduled items, and the first one is 3.1, which is a delegation from M. Wills regarding the homelessness crisis in London. So welcome, Ms. Wills. Come to the podium when you wish to speak. Hit the microphone button, and when you're finished speaking, hit it again so that, because only one mic will work at a time. The clerk will come and get that.
Thanks so much.
Just use the mouse or use the arrows to scroll forward.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Hello. I am here today to speak about housing crisis. I know that there were other items on the agenda for housing. I know there was an article this morning in the paper about some funding that we've heard about, but I am here to talk in terms of the crisis for housing. My name is Margaret Wills. I'm the Executive Director of Crouch Neighborhood Resource Centre. For those of you who don't know Crouch, we're a small but very mighty organization located in Crouch Neighborhood Library, right in the heart of Hamilton Road. We provide a number of services in the community, from emergency food and baby items, access to clothing vouchers and household needs vouchers through Mission Services, support for mental illness, addiction, and access to housing services. We do community development activities such as Fun and Food Fridays, after school, and summer day camp programs, and more. I'm here not only to represent Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center today, but also the agencies that are listed and in front of you. We're asking the Community and Protective Services Committee to present a motion to City Council to have the present affordable and geared to income housing situation in London declared a crisis and immediately commit money and staff to a solution implementable immediately. We understand that the City of London staff are presently looking at updating the housing strategy with consultations, conversations, and surveys throughout the city, which is always, of course, necessary, and we certainly understand that. However, when there's a crisis, and let's compare it to a flood or tornado, it's not the time to stop and say we're planning. If a number of people were displaced due to a natural disaster, our response to them would not be stop. We're planning and we're going to do something for you. Food, clothing, and shelter are the very basic needs for people. While food and clothing, many social services try to make available, shelter is not available. We're not a third world country. We're not a country where extensive ghettos should be the norm. And we're not a city where homelessness should run rampant and people are forced to sleep in parks, doorways, unsafe living conditions, or when available, shelters. We're an affluent city with a good quality of life for many people, and for many more, no quality of life at all. At Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center, we're seeing 3 to 5 people a week who are in need of housing, and we're one of the smallest agencies in the city. Past practice was to look for private sector opportunities, help people search for low rent accommodations. Those included boarding houses, bachelor or one-bedroom apartments, or larger accommodations for families based on what their income could cover. Where private sector options were not apparent, our support and advocacy specialists would complete a housing application with the client and include a letter of support if the need was dire. That means the person was imminently being evicted, presently homeless, had significant medical issues, such as undergoing cancer treatments, heart surgery, or was facing violence in their present accommodations. We're fortunate enough to have the Housing Stability Bank, which is a service of the city and Salvation Army, located with us every Thursday. So when there were issues of first and last month's rent or outstanding utility bills, we could refer very easily. At present, there is no housing. We have no answers. Those 3 to 5 people that are coming to us every week, we have nothing to send them to. There are no units in the private sector, even the boarding homes, which provide a room and shared washroom facilities. What we're experiencing is an increased number of clients coming to us advising that they're receiving notice of eviction as more landlords are undertaking renovations in order to increase rents to coincide with the rest of the rental market. Our clients often receive OW or ODSP payments. They're the poorest among us. While a number of them would perhaps have received services through psychiatric hospitals if they existed anymore, now they rely on emergency rooms and when in absolute dire need, the extremely overloaded services at Parkwood. And there's a young man staying at Parkwood right now, and thank goodness they're keeping him there because he's stabilized and has no place to go. That's only one instance where they're able to keep him. Usually they aren't. While many of us who found ourselves perhaps without a job or living with a brain injury or an addiction, we might have families to turn to for help. Many of our clients have no one. Others worked many years in labor positions which offered no security, no benefits, and when injury or health issues forced them to stop, there were no options but OW, and if they were lucky, ODSP. A single person receiving OW gets at the high end, $748 per month. $375 of that is shelter allowance. Even a single room in a boarding house with shared washroom facilities is now at $500 a month. That would leave $248 for food, clothing, hygiene, transportation, communication. Some have a phone, some don't. Social services like ours assist daily with food, clothing, hygiene, some transportation. We don't provide phones. Sometimes we let them use our phone. If you're fortunate enough, and again, I kind of say fortunate enough to qualify for ODSP, that means that your disability has been properly documented, meaning that you're one of the few people able to access a doctor for that kind of documentation. And your monthly income may be as high as $1,150 a month, with $475 for shelter. Still not enough to cover the cost of a room with a shared washroom. And if living with a disability, not enough to cover the special needs of the disability, especially increased transportation costs, if regular visits to doctors for tests, et cetera, are required. There are additional resources available for those costs, but they require significant documentation. It's a full-time job just to get the documentation so that you can go and get an X-ray taken. So if you're on benefits, your only hope for accommodation is rent geared to income housing. And here's where the perfect storm hits us. Those apartment units are in such short supply, you know the numbers, 4,897 people are on the wait list for those. Of those, 142 people are on the special priority wait list. They are at risk of violence in their present living situation. 943 are urgent homeless. They are homeless. And these are the homeless people who've actually put an application in for geared to income housing. 190 are urgent medical. They might be dealing with a chronic or acute illness. We know people going through chemotherapy who are homeless and have no place to stay, and they certainly don't get to stay in the hospitals. 201 are urgent social. That might mean that CAS has your children until you can find a place to live. A wait of 7 to 10 years is expected. If you have special priority, urgent homeless, medical or social, you might find a place within a year. And what are your options in the meantime? You can couch surf if there are people kind enough to let you stay on their couch. I know that one home in the area is kind of letting everybody stay on their couch, but they don't have running water. Or you can use a shelter, which works well unless you're a family. Roth Home is full and has been full for over a year. You're a woman facing violence. Women's shelters are full and have been full all year. You have a pet, and some may say that's a little, out there. These people, the pets are the only love they have ever had, and they can't stay anywhere because they have that pet. You're trying to stay free of drugs, then the shelter's not the place for you, and people will avoid the shelters for that reason. You have a mental illness, which is exacerbated by noise, crowds, violence, or other. Or you have had a previous altercation in one of the shelters, and in that case, you're probably afraid to go back to the shelter. Unfortunately, the situation has become so dire and affordable housing for the poorest among us so scarce that almost complacency has set in. We go to meetings weekly with other agencies. And at those meetings, the conversation around the table is, are you having any luck finding housing for people? No, nobody's having any luck finding housing for people. And there's no solutions in sight. On April 26th, at a presentation on encampment outreach that was arranged by the city staff, it was a great presentation, the presenter pointed out the statistics regarding the situations of many of the people who are living rough or experiencing homelessness. What was plain to see is that these are the most vulnerable people in our communities. Almost half of the people indicated that physical health led to a loss of their housing. Almost half indicated that mental health affects their housing stability, including bipolar, schizophrenia, brain injury, and sexual assault survivors. Almost half have indicated they've been attacked or assaulted while homeless. Almost half are homeless due to abuse or trauma. With all of those almost halves, we can see that many of them have at least 2, maybe 3 of those instances. So in effect, what we're doing is throwing away the most vulnerable people in our community. The presentation was informative in terms on how to approach people, how to talk to them about being comfortable enough to begin on working towards housing. Many of us are already working that way. We've gained their trust. They're brave enough to share their stories with us. And then our response is, now that you've shared and now that you've opened up, give us a year at minimum, and maybe we'll be able to help you get a place to live. That's the only response that we have right now in our agencies. No matter whether it's a woman trying to leave a violent situation, families facing eviction, escaping violence, or living with 5 children in a 2-bedroom apartment. People who are mentally or physically challenged, and that's a whole other kettle of worms. Our response is the same each time. When asked about what to do when there's no housing available for people who need someplace to live, the presenter, who spends his life looking at homelessness issues, responded that there must be the political will to respond. So I'm asking you to show political will. The staff in the housing division of the city are caring and compassionate and want to help us help our clients. But at present, they have nothing to work with. We understand it's an issue across the country. It's not just London, and we understand that it's taken many years to get to this point. To the point where the present stock of geared to income housing is in significant need of repair, and where there has been zero will to build because not raising taxes is the goal over and above having a functional city. Even before that, we can go way back when hospitals for the mentally ill were shut down so that we could say to these people, here's $800, live well, be free. And we would support them in the community with social agencies who have nowhere near the resources that they need to support those people. We're here today because we see this issue on a daily basis. We work with homeless and precariously housed people every day, and it doesn't do us any good to just sit back and complain about it when we have no capacity to fix it. We're social service agencies. We're in the midst of struggling with continuing funding cuts that require layoffs, reduction of services, no raises for years. We all know the story of social service agencies. But we do have ideas, and we do have volunteers who want to help, and we do have the will to put whatever we can into this, beginning with asking for your help. Hopefully, the new plan being developed will provide some opportunities for increasing the present stock of geared to income and affordable housing units. Already, we've heard some great suggestions and strategies for moving forward from presenters from other communities, arranged by city staff who are telling us about innovative methods being used, such as solar panels on new builds, not only negating electricity costs, but contributing to the grid, such as partnerships with private sector landlords who can benefit from making 10 units in each residential building geared to income units, from working with experienced social service agencies to ensure that support services are available for people to stay housed. That doesn't, however, help a family being evicted today. What we need immediately is money for motel stays. I don't want to ask a family to sleep rough. We did have one family doing that out of pocket, which left $50 for their family to access food, hygiene, everything else that they needed for the entire month. Additional staff hired to work on prepping vacant units as quickly as possible. Here's a big one. The opportunity for people receiving benefits, OW or ODSP, to share rental space without being penalized with a deduction of their shelter amount. When we were young and couldn't afford our own place, we would get a roommate. If these people get a roommate, they get their shelter allowance cut. So it does them no good to search out any kind of opportunities to share space. Short-term rental top-ups so that people can afford low-priced private sector rent until they're able to access a rent geared to income unit. If it costs $1,500 to shelter, to support a person in shelter, let's provide those people with $1,000 instead to either rent in private sector or at least stay sheltered in a motel. Immediately, make available a piece of land where there is access to washrooms and showers. I don't know if there are vacant community centers, and allow people to camp without being moved each day. There are people in wheelchairs who are setting up an encampment and being moved every single day, often late at night. Provide security, regulations, and cleaning and maintenance. Commit to a working group consisting of a city staff person from each of the following departments: homelessness prevention and housing, planning department, a staff member from each of the shelters, including ANOVA, the Mission, Salvation Army, Unity, YOU, who are wonderfully building a youth shelter, which will be full in a week as soon as it opens. London Cares and those agencies that have Housing First support staff. Ask for a 30-day solution and provide the resources to make that happen. I'm happy to participate. I have no resources to bring forward, but I do have great facilitation skills. I have volunteers, and I will do so in whatever way is needed. And while this is happening, we can hope that the longer-term planning process that's taking place will eliminate the need to action a homelessness crisis again. Again, we're asking that the request for immediate attention, I'm not asking for another long-term plan here, and money go forward to City Council for action, and that the political will to make significant changes moving forward when staff present the 5-year plan for approval and political support. The will to do better is essential now and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wills. Councillor Sully.
Thank you. Sorry, the microphones only work one at a time. And thank you for your presentation and for coming here today and speaking to us. I took some notes on my phone because there were some stats that stood out to me. And I had a question about the wait list. You said 4,897 people as of April 2019. And as it stands now in the next 5 or 10 years, do you think that the number is going to grow even more? And just kind of what's your perspective on that number in the 5 and the 10 year kind of trajectory?
If nothing's done, that's going to grow significantly. I think that what we've been seeing, and part of that perfect storm, I said, was rental costs and vacancy rates. So something significant needs to be done. I'm hoping that the 5-year plan certainly has some great feedback on that and something to do something long-term. Because right now, I mean, it's pretty bad, and if it grows from where it is now, then we're in big trouble.
And just as a separate question through the chair, and you mentioned motel stays and increased fundings. And I know in the past as a counselor and just me outside of my role as a counselor have heard and from others just kind of their experience with sometimes it not being adequate enough. Obviously, it probably would seem more ideal than being in a shelter. So I guess my question to you is, and I know you touched on regulations and pieces like that, but what kind of role can City Hall play in ensuring that the motels have the standards that are needed? Because I hear from people who are placed in certain places that it's sometimes not the best situation for them to be in. So I just want to know from your experience if you can kind of touch on that. And then the other part of the question that I had, which I guess I might be answering myself, is, you know, even though, let's say you talk about the political will and people not wanting to put up the money, let's say it's $100 million to fix it in London, hypothetically, but we spend a lot of money in other areas that might lead to more increases, whether it's more bylaw officers, more police officers to address other concerns that are caused because of lack of housing. So do you feel as if, you know, if we're addressing housing, we might actually be saving money in other areas, and it just makes economic sense to do what needs to be done, not just because it's the right thing, but also the political will, and just because it makes financial sense as well?
So for the second part of your question, I mean, absolutely. I don't have statistics. I haven't done the studies, but it's going to save emergency room visits. It's going to say, I mean, you know, if you talk to police officers right now, their full-time job is taking care of addicts or dealing with people who are homeless. They don't even get a chance to deal with crime in the community. They're so busy coming out to calls to move somebody from an encampment, you know, because let's not let them sleep, which I'm sure the police don't enjoy doing. So, yeah, it's going to save, it's going to cost a lot of money to house people and to house them properly. But yeah, it's going to save a lot of money. And our hope, and I'm sure you've heard about Housing First, and where until people are housed safely, they can't deal with their addictions. They can't deal with their mental health issues. They can't deal with their physical health issues. So it's Housing First. I think we can all imagine if we didn't have our home to go to at the end of the day and what that would look like or feel like to us. In terms of the motels and standards, what I'm asking for is a very quick stopgap measure. It's a roof. That's all I can say right now is it's a roof. And perhaps the committee that I'm asking to be put together can identify where it's appropriate. And it's not a one-shoe-fits-all. You're not going to send families to the same place where you're sending people who are declaring that, yes, they are addicted. You know, there are different places to send different people.
Thanks, committee. I'm going to go to staff first to get comment.
Through the chair, I want to thank Ms. Willis for making the presentation. She has very succinctly and very appropriately, unfortunately, identified the challenges we have in our community. With respect to the wait list, and I just want to provide some clarity as well, in addition to what Ms. Willis shared, we do have a wait list currently right now of about 4,700 individuals and families. I will be clear that not everybody on that wait list is homeless. Everyone is looking for housing that's more affordable for them. So there are people on that wait list who are living places. It may not be the best place for them to live or an affordable place for them to live, but we are starting to look at that wait list in terms of how we triage that wait list. In the work that we've been doing in our community presentations, we've been asking the community to give us some great feedback about how to deal with the list. The reason the list has grown has to do with exactly the things that you spoke about, the availability in the community of housing, the fact that people aren't moving. There's a stagnancy in the wait list at this point in time. There used to be a fair number of people who would move within it. That doesn't happen anymore. and the costs in our community for housing in the private sector have gone up substantially. So that's a really important piece for us to look at. It is one of the elements of the work that we do in providing supports to people who are homeless and or needing in supportive housing. Happy to receive your presentation and happy to have more discussions with you as well as council directs.
Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to echo the thanks for the presentation, first of all, and I think it is very fair to describe the situation in the community as a crisis. How we tackle that crisis is the challenge, and I'm glad that you've put some ideas on the table for us to consider. I don't pretend to have them all, and I know that a significant portion of the challenge, frankly, falls at the feet of the provincial government when you talk about the OW and ODSP penalties and frankly, the inadequate income that those programs provide to people in the first place. And we can't fill that provincial gap. It's simply not sustainable for us to do so. But one of the things that you mentioned as an idea was the dedicated land with water and shower facilities for a semi-permanent encampment space for the time being. I wonder if there's been any discussion, and I don't know, Madam Chair, whether our presenter or perhaps staff or both maybe want to comment on this. One of the initiatives that has had quite a bit of success in other communities, both in the US and in some places in Canada, and it has happened in Canada, so I know that it is not a situation where our environment or our climate is not conducive to that. In fact, I know we have a manufacturer of these here in London. The idea of implementing the tiny house model that is used in so many communities, some of which are standalone units with running water in them, some are living units with a communal facility where the waters and laundry facilities and things like that are. Has discussion happened in London around this? Because frankly, I've heard crickets on it, and I don't know why, when we've seen other communities succeed implementing this, that we're not at least looking at this, social agencies, city staff, private sector investors together as a potential pilot to see if we can alleviate some of the problem that way.
I'll go to staff first, because I thought it looked like you had something you wanted to say.
And through the chair, I was actually hoping Margaret would speak first. Thank you for the suggestion, and clearly council's aware that we try to find a really fine balance between providing supports to individuals, but also supporting individuals through our coordinated informed response. So I want to be clear that we have kind of a dual purpose in making sure that people are safe. I guess we are trying to look at all options for housing, and we would not rule out any. Having said that, the city has put in place a housing first reality, and we want to support people being housed when they need it and when they can get it, and putting the supports around them. The challenge in this current environment, and regrettably it isn't changing very much, is that housing first is becoming, while it's still our positioning, it's hard to do when the units don't seem to be available in our community. So I think it's important for us to look at all those options, and I'd be happy to talk more with our community stakeholders, our colleagues in planning and our colleagues in all of our service areas, including the Housing Development Corporation, about that.
And I've heard the suggestion many times. Unfortunately, I have not heard any initiative that takes it back past suggestion point.
Anybody else on committee? Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly thank you, Ms. Wills, for your presentation today. And with the tiny homes, certainly, I know St. Thomas had an article recently of one of their city councilors looking into what could be done there. Two questions through you to staff of, could you, having been to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Conference and talking with colleagues out in Vancouver and the West Coast of their housing issues, could you tell me or speak to the point of, they're calling them garden suites, so suites in your backyard that could help house people, as well as garage conversions, what our city bylaws are not allowing right now?
Through the chair, I may ask our colleagues in planning, Mr. Barrett is here, and he may be able to speak to that directly through your, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Through the chair, currently the city has policies in place that permit a secondary dwelling unit in any single detached, semi-detached, or row house in any zone, in any location in the city. We also amended the bylaw in order to provide for those, and that was done about 2 years ago when the province first brought forward the legislation that required municipalities to put these types of policies in place. So they are there right now. I don't have exact numbers on it, but I do know that through the building division, they are tracking these so they can get a sense as to how many people are actually taking up on this opportunity. But I do know that people have been taking up on the opportunity, and the regulations are there for these things to occur.
Thank you for those comments, and wondering if that can come back to committee just for we know. Just thinking as tools in the toolbox, if there was some way to incentivize those, that it might be easier and quicker than dealing with a new development in our community. Also looking through Madam Chair to staff of how many units do we have that could be accessed but are currently vacant because we're behind on repairs, that if there's a way to put more funding towards repairs of the units that we're behind on to get them back into the units available for occupancy.
Through the chair, I just wanted to, further to Mr. Barrett's comments, there is a report that's coming to the planning committee today about tools for affordable housing. So Mr. Barrett and his colleagues will have a chance to talk a little bit more about those tools as well. So we're kind of hitting you with many housing issues today. In terms of the units that are vacant in our community, what I can say to that is we have 63 housing providers in our community. And so at any given time, because of repair needs or because of changes, transitions, or re-renting situations, they're going to be vacant units. Our requirement and our desire is that as a service manager for housing in this community, that that vacancy be kept to a minimum as much as possible. Having said that, sometimes the repairs are of significant nature. It takes a bit of time, but the priority for us from housing services and from the city to all of our service providers in the housing area is that those units get filled as quickly as possible. And it's very clear that we have a need for that to happen. So I can't give you that number. I could get that number for you. I just don't have it with me right now.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Ms. Wills for the presentation again. I have a few suggestions. There was a request for money. We do have a Community Economic and Development Reserve Fund that the council oversees. I would certainly support draining that in hopes of making a difference. We could do that this year. It's interesting, my parents are excited about going camping for a month, but they're not going to be moved every day. So I think the suggestion for a campground is good. Perhaps we could have staff look for a couple places to do that. I know that there are groups that have spoken to me that would be willing to help in ways, for instance, providing lockers or a container where people could lock up their items and have that be secure. So there's certainly help from the community in whatever way we want to provide a new initiative for this. And finally, I would say to us when we're trying to make decisions on intensity of housing, maybe we need to remember that there is the rule of supply and demand. As we have more housing in the city, the cost of that housing will drop. And I think we need to make those decisions wisely as well, because that will have an impact on these kinds of crises. Thank you.
So, since I'm not seeing any other comments, I've to staff from the chair. The Core Area Informed Response initiative that began last summer, it's my understanding that it was to address the issue of encampments, and rather than just move people along, there's actually substantial work being done so that we're not just moving them along. I wonder if you could give me some idea what that really means.
Thank you, through the chair. That is an intention of certainly of the program, but as Ms. Wills has pointed out, some of the challenges of finding units to that are best positioned or best supportive of those who are experiencing homelessness or involved in encampments is really challenging and continues to be more challenging. There is also the reality that some people find that they're not interested right at that time to find other housing. So that's another piece of this. So they might choose, and I'm just saying this from our experience, they might choose to go someplace else as opposed to look for housing. That might be their choice at that given time because they're not quite ready to go for housing, or they're not interested at that point in time. Suffice it to say, the bottom line is the intention is to provide opportunities to support housing through our housing stability workers in our community, and that's a challenging piece given the market that we're in right now.
So I've had the pleasure of sitting on the planning committee for 3 out of the last 4 years, and I'm starting my 4th year right now. So I know of the tools, as Mr. Barrett spoke about secondary suites. It's something that we are now able to do, and we implemented that a couple of years ago. We've also been allowed by the province to implement inclusionary zoning, and also to include the idea of mixed income in a housing development through bonusing. So when a developer wants increased density or height or something increased beyond what the zone allows, one of our bonusing requirements could be setting aside a certain number of units as affordable. So far, I believe all we've done have been affordable. We do have the ability to set them aside as rent-geared income units rather than simply affordable units. I know the planning committee did, there has been at least one zoning application with a bonus where staff recommended some affordable housing units be included. And then there was another planning application where the committee itself sent it back to staff as part of the referral to include affordable housing as part of the bonusing. So those are some things that I know have been going on over the last number of years. Unfortunately, things move very slowly, and unfortunately, people hadn't realized up until the time that we were allowed those tools that we didn't have those tools in our toolbox in the past. So my question, another question to staff is, coming up in item 2.1 of the consent items is the report that talks about provincial funding coming our way to address some of these issues. And I'm wondering if any of the issues that Ms. Wills brought forward to us and enunciated so articulately, do we have hope or anticipation that the funding will help with any of those issues?
Through the chair, yes. It won't address the plethora of the challenges we have in our community, but as you can tell from looking at that report, page 9 gives you a sense of our proposed plan for spending of the funding that we received, at least the funding for this year and the next 2 years moving forward. It's our intention to look to build new affordable housing. It's our intention to repair the existing housing we have. And that is also in combination of the work that we already do, the regeneration work we do with LMCH and with HDC, and the work that council has done to support housing being part of your strat plan. And so we're held to the work in housing because you've held us to that in the work of the strat plan. So I want to be clear about that. It's a piece of it, but clearly, based on the advice we'll get as part of the homeless prevention and housing plan work that we're doing currently too as well, that Ms. Willis has spoke to, we'll get some further advice from our stakeholders about what we actually should be doing. But I appreciate the desire to move quickly on something that's so urgent.
So we're speaking of a crisis here. We're speaking about immediate needs. I note in the 2019/20 year, which we're currently in, we're looking at over $4 million in funding. Will that money be able to be implemented and put into work with some immediacy?
In order for us to keep that money, yes.
So it's a requirement. We have to spend it.
Sorry, through the chair, at least to commit the dollars.
Okay.
For the period of time, for sure. And our intention would be to move the funding as quickly as we could on certain initiatives.
Okay. So there's also a 5-year update coming forward. Why are you coming now with this 5-year update? Does it include some of the issues that Ms. Wills has identified?
Through the chair, yes. So the city has an existing homeless prevention and housing plan. It's for an extended period of time. We are required, as per the provincial guidelines, to complete a 5-year update. That's the process that we're in place right now. And our team has developed and implemented a very, I would say, comprehensive approach to getting feedback from the community, both through survey, through community engagement sessions. We're holding our last one this Wednesday afternoon. And we have also had a community conversation in a box reality where people can give us their feedback from their community groups or from their neighborhood associations. It's our intention to get as much advice as we can through that process to inform what the plan update will look like moving forward, and that plan will come back to council in the fall. We know the world has changed a lot since 2013 in our community, since we put that plan in place, so many things have changed. We're also really pleased because many people have come to our consultation sessions repeated times, depending upon the issue that we've been talking about, whether it's homeless prevention, development of new affordable housing. So we're really happy that people are coming back repeatedly to give us more feedback about different elements of our housing work.
And Ms. Wills very helpfully provided us with a list of organizations and individuals. Are you working with many or any or all of these organizations on this list?
Through the chair, I would say, having looked at them very quickly, we are aware of and working with many of these organizations as well, or have been part of our consultation process too.
So thank you again. I know the committee has thanked you, and I'm very grateful for coming forward. I'm especially, it's wonderful to have you come here in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation. I appreciate the good words you've given to city staff, because I do know as well that the hard work and the passion that they bring to their work. This is not an easy issue for anybody. What I will recommend to committee is, if there is a motion in mind that you have to address Ms. Will's recommendation to us, perhaps we should hear the staff reports, address those, and then decide if there is a motion that could work in conjunction with what staff are bringing forward. Does that sound okay? Thank you very much. Anybody else on committee have any comments? So what we need now is a motion to receive the delegation and the presentation, and it's moved by Councillor Pelosa and seconded by Councillor Lewis, and we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, committee, so we're going to hear the next delegation, which is item 3.2, and it is from Ms. Riddell on behalf of the London for All committee. They're going to give us an update on the London for All plan, and housing is also an issue under the London for All plan, so it's all kind of tied in nicely, and will perhaps also inform our discussion later on when we hear from the staff. So welcome, committee members. I believe you must have representatives from your working accountability tables, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
So thank you. My name is Roxanne Riddle. I'm here with United Way Elgin Middlesex, and we have representation from the London for All leadership table. So we thank you for allowing us to present today.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Todd, and I'm someone with living experience who works with London for All on the leadership board. London for All, A Roadmap to End Poverty was published in March 2016. And then in the following May 2017, United Way Elgin Middlesex was named as the lead agency for London for All to see to the recommendations. One of, I guess, the surprising things for us once we got started was forging these unlikely partnerships, just putting people together in a room who normally wouldn't talk to each other, who could realize that they do the same thing and they might as well work together. And then the bottom line is lived and living experience involvement is important to United Way, the City of London, and to our success. And I'm happy to say that around 50% of the members of our leadership table are people with lived experience.
Good afternoon. My name's Deb Peckham. I am also a person with living experience, which means that I do now live in poverty. The lead agency acts as the project manager, overseeing the implementation of 112 recommendations in London for All, and carries the conversation forward by bringing partners together, developing and overseeing implementations, plans, and ensuring ongoing accountability for the work. United Way is uniquely positioned to be the lead agency because of the scope of its relationships with the City of London, community agencies, corporate partners, government, and labor. The City of London has been highly supportive of this project and provides counsel and support. The city staff members are participating in both the accountability tables and the leadership tables. Many city staff members are engaged with the implementation of the recommendations where it aligns with their actual departments. Would ask that you refer to your packages if you'd like to see a list of the names of the volunteers and individuals participating in London for All. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Marcy Allen Easton, and I am a member of the United Way London for All leadership table, and I represent persons with lived experience. So London for All identified 112 recommendations to address poverty in our community and to ignite change. The plan to ignite change balances what Londoners have said is urgent, what is available in the short term, what builds on existing momentum, and what opportunities in the community for long-term solutions and systems change through collaboration with multiple service providers. The action plan is divided into 8 domains, as you can see on the screen, with recommendations pertaining to each area. Each domain has an accountability table with representation from those with knowledge, with field knowledge from the community, as well a minimum of at least one person from the leadership table sits at each accountability table. At these tables, recommendations were reviewed, an account of where we are, what is being done, and where we need to go was taken. And then the implementation of each recommendation reflects the understanding of poverty as a rights issue, as an equity issue, a community issue with economic, social, and cultural dimensions. So you heard my friends Eric and Deb speak when they mentioned that they were persons on the who sit at the leadership table with living experience. Early on, when we spoke as a group, we decided that it was important to include both persons with living and lived. And it was something that we were pretty determined to include. Under Roxanne's leadership, it was decided that the reason for that was that persons with living experience can often bring to the table what the needs are of folks today that are living in poverty, and persons with lived experience can also share what's needed when you're moving your way out of poverty. So if you decide to go back to school, if you move into the employment sector, if you move into new housing, there are needs that folks with living experience can share to to help as well. It also tends to bridge a gap between the two. When you've got persons, sometimes when you bring persons with living experience to the table, there's a little bit of fear as to how they might fit in with everybody else, if they can, if their voice will be taken seriously. And often when you can include both at the table, they tend to bridge the gap for each other. We participated in a panel at a event just a little while ago, and when we were there, we spoke, and we shared with everybody that the London for All leadership table included a 50% lived and living experience participation, and I can tell you that the room was filled with people from organizations all across the country, and they were completely shocked. Many of them said that it was unheard of to have that much representation. And we have been contacted on a regular basis since then, asking how we're doing it, how it's working, and how we're managing to continue on this way. And it's what makes London for All great.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Ziegner, and I'm the CEO of United Way Elgin Middlesex. I can't say how thrilled we are to have been a part of this transformative project for our community, not only in terms of delivering on a set of recommendations that were thoughtfully developed, but that inclusion of individuals with lived and living experience. I can say from our own organization's standpoint, it really has been transformative. We every day talk about poverty, about mental health, about issues in our community, yet we rely on maybe academic experts instead of the people who are living through the issues in that moment. And it's been really important and a very important voice and very intentional why I had my colleagues Deb and Eric and Marcy here to present alongside me today. So where are we today after 2 years of delivering on London for All? Of the 112 recommendations, there are now 52 completed and 60 in progress, and you can refer to the full report that was provided to you. Our work over the past 2 years has generated great momentum, commitment, accountability, and impact. And as was referenced, there's a list of volunteers who are involved. And so there's community leaders, individuals with lived experience. And we were really intentional about not wanting all the usual suspects as a part of the conversation. We really wanted to broaden our scope so that we could broaden our effectiveness. Some recommendations that were a priority of the City of London or participating organizations, some of them are taking longer, as has been identified through the housing conversation. We're relying on multiple levels of government, but have been very heavily engaged in advocacy through United Way and through London for All. London for All is ensuring that the City of London continues to be a priority, continues to place a priority on addressing poverty and advocating to other levels of government for investments and policy change that will reduce poverty in a generation. Change takes deliberate effort and time, and United Way Elgin Middlesex is a key contributor to the creation of long-term and meaningful change.
As well as completing the 112 recommendations, it was a priority for the city to know, is London for All going to make a difference? And how do we measure the impact that we're having? So we're happy to report London for All was awarded an Ontario Trillium Foundation grant. And we're working with Kovacs Group, Inc., on the development of a measurement framework for London for All. And so we'll be reporting on that this year. Excuse me. I'm also coming forward with a request for some help on a recommendation. So I have been working with leaders from our local Indigenous service agencies. I've also been working with the London District Chiefs Council and the Southern First Nations Secretariat. Specifically, these meetings were about one of the London for All recommendations, in particular 1.6, and I'll read that to you. Strengthen relationships and increase partnerships between municipal leaders, Indigenous peoples, and community partners to create an Indigenous poverty strategy. So at this point, I'm requesting that you can identify representatives from City Council to actively participate with me with this group of Indigenous leaders in order to advance this recommendation. Thank you.
So thank you for your presentation. It's wonderful. I wonder at this time if I could turn the chair over to my vice chair.
Certainly, I'll trade you spots.
Thank you. So again, thanks for coming. It's always a pleasure to hear the updates. I know a lot of the work you do is not extremely public work. So there tends to be, even in the media, not necessarily speaking about anybody in this room, but sometimes in the media, there is a perception that nothing's happening and that, that this report just is fluff and sitting on the shelf, gathering dust. So, but because I speak to, through you, Mr. Presiding Officer, I speak to Ms. Riddle fairly regularly. I get updates on things that are happening. And I know that I know the hard work that's going on at the leadership table and on the accountability tables. I know that even getting it up and running took a lot of, motivation, a lot of hard work on Ms. Riddell's part, a lot of, I don't want to say arm twisting, but some really strong shoves sometimes, and that was really, really good and necessary. And I believe it was Ms. Easton that said, not the usual suspects at the table, and that was part of the hard work to ensure that it wasn't just the usual suspects. And I know when the report was being created, there was a very strong emphasis on having voices at the table, voices with experience, whether it's current or past experience of living in poverty and what it's like. So I do have a draft, a motion, and I sent the wording to the clerk, but I will say this, and again, it's wonderful to hear the work being done with Indigenous and specifically poverty and Indigenous peoples in London, because that was an emphasis we placed when we were doing the work of the poverty panel. We had one member from the Indigenous community in London that was on our panel, Ms. Vanessa Ampman-Smith, who really helped inform a lot of the discussions around poverty specific to Indigenous peoples, knowing that one person cannot speak on behalf of every single Indigenous person, but just having that added lens at the table was important. And we had many, many community meetings. Many community meetings were held with out in the community, not directed by the people on the poverty panel, but we were certainly invited to those community conversations. And there was a community conversation held at the health unit, and it was an Indigenous poverty circle. And we invited leaders from, local leaders and leaders from the First Nations that are near London to come and contribute to this Indigenous poverty circle. And I must say, having those voices at the table really did add to the report and change it from what it probably would have been without those voices. So my draft motion is that a member of municipal council be appointed to participate in discussions with representatives from London for All and local First Nations leaders and Indigenous-led organizations to discuss the strengthened relationships and increased partnerships between municipal leaders, Indigenous peoples, and community partners to create an Indigenous poverty strategy set out in the London for All, a roadmap to end poverty. So through you, Mr. Presiding Officer, I'd love to hear Ms. Riddle's feedback on that, if you believe that motion will get at where you're looking to go.
Yeah, so absolutely. We've had some very good meetings with the Indigenous leaders, and at this point, they've asked me to come forward to then bring it to you in hopes that we would have representation from council to continue the talks with them.
Okay, Councillor Cassidy, are you satisfied? Did you want to table your motion then?
Yeah, I'd like to put that motion. I did note that I wrote a member of municipal council, or that is the draft language, and I'm wondering through you, Mr. Presiding Officer, if we should open it up for more than one member, or if Ms. Riddell is happy with just one politician at the table.
We were actually thinking maybe it could be 2, but we wouldn't want it to be much bigger than that. Thanks.
Well, I suspect that you probably won't have all 15 of us, but Councillor Cassidy, did you want to amend that to say members?
Sure.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. The clerk is just getting that typed up. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Pelosa? And any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll just wait a moment for that to come up. If we can just get our tech support to help us get that up on the screen. And Councillor Cassidy, if you'd want to trade places with me so we can vote.
Councillor Sully?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question through you or to our guest here. As far as, and of course I support this, so I have no issues, but just I want to make sure, and I think you might have touched on this. I know London for All is here, and they've had Indigenous representation, and I know maybe you could speak on this, and you kind of touched on it, but, you know, members from the local First Nation leaders are anticipating this and are supportive of this. Is someone able to touch on that and kind of who some of those leaders are, just for comfort?
Ms. Riddell, go ahead.
Sure. So the chair of London for All is Luke Nicholas, representing Atlosa. And in our meetings, there's been Raymond Deliri from Atlosa, Al Day from Namarin Friendship Center, and Brian Doki from SOHAC, as well as the London and District Chiefs and the Southern First Nations Secretariat. So there's been quite a few people.
And so I know they mentioned the names, but they are all supportive, correct? Okay, thank you. And through the chair, just one more question. I know because it'll probably come up, I'm fine with the language either way. I know it says that members, and I just didn't want my colleagues, once they see that council, to anticipate or think that that could be 4 people or 5 people or 6 people. My preference would be that it just says 2, because that's what the intent was, but I'll leave it with you because I just anticipate what could happen at council, but it's not my motion.
So when I present the report at council, I'll make sure that they're asking for not more than 2, hopefully. And honestly, Councillor Sully, we don't usually have people banging down the door for extra work. Not saying anything, just. So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded, and we can all vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So thank you again for coming, and thank you for all the hard work that you do. I know that it is, for the most part, volunteering of time and talent, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Sorry, I think that members of committee, myself included, might want to comment on the report as a whole, rather than, not that the motion was not important, but not just limited to the motion.
Absolutely. So we have to receive the report and the delegation. If Councillor Lewis, you want to move receipt, and Councillor Selly is seconding that, and Councillor Lewis, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to preface my comments by saying I really appreciate the work, and especially Deb and Eric and Marcy, and I know you represent only some of the people with lived experience. I think it's really important to have those voices at the table, at the leadership table and at the accountability tables. And I know that I have talked to Ms. Ziegner one-on-one about some of the work that's being done around this, and I really, really do appreciate the hard work that is going into this. I want to say to my colleagues, though, let's not take 52 recommendations marked as complete and pat ourselves on the back, because I don't think we should. I think, in fact, when we look at 52 recommendations completed, I would actually argue that only 49 of those have been done, because when I look at 2.6, 2.7, and 2.8, while lobbying has happened with the province and the provincial government, OW rates, ODSP rates, and CPP rates have not changed. In fact, we've seen a provincial government that is reducing those income levels. We've seen a federal government that has failed to act on CPP. Again, we have seniors who are getting a cup of coffee a raise this year, seniors who are struggling to try and stay in their homes, by the way. We've got 22 recommendations in this report on housing, and only 2 of those are marked complete. 2 out of 22 on housing, which we heard from Ms. Wills is something we should be considering a crisis. And of those 2, one of them directed $750,000 into LMHC's regeneration needs. Well, we know the number is much, much higher than that. I will say to colleagues also that both the past council and our current iteration of council, I think has really helped make progress on the transportation and transit issues. I think that the bus passes for folks with low income, for children under 12 riding free, and for secondary students, I think those have made a very positive impact in the community. So we have taken some steps forward, but by no means should we look at this 52 recommendations done, and I'm going to say 49, and I'm going to encourage the work being done by London for All to continue to lobby our federal and provincial representatives on those income issues, because they're not going away anytime soon. Let's not say, hey, there's a silver lining to the crisis in London, because there's a heck of a lot more work to be done. If we were in chambers, I'd use some stronger language than that. It is not without any disrespect to the people who are doing this work. And through you, Madam Chair, to the delegation that we have, I have a specific question on one item in particular, and that's the Made in London campaign, which was one of the recommendations around promoting Made in London goods and services so that we were increasing employment opportunities. And I know that this is sort of coming at you out of left field, so do you have any update for us on where that is? Because there was nothing in the report on that.
Yes, so I'd like to answer 2 things. One is, when we mark a recommendation complete, if you've met anyone on the leadership table or any of the other tables, we're never done. And so as a group, it was discussed, what do we need to do in order to say that we've completed this? But every time we get to that point, people say, okay, awesome, we did this, now let's do this. So we're continuously working on things. I look at my support in the seats upstairs too. Sometimes we've had some great wins and then government changes. But we're just trying to keep updated on the work that we did do, and we're still going. In terms of the Made in London, we've been working with London Economic Development Corporation and ways that we can better profile, and the Employment Sector Council, ways that we can better profile products that are made and produced here in London and how we can promote that. And we're also working with Pillar quite a bit, so we'll have more coming on that recommendation.
Thank you. So that was a question that I had for the completed, knowing that, I have 52 completed, and then I have written beside it ongoing. So I understand that many of the completed, such as advocacy work, whether it's to this level of government or to provincial or federal, they're ongoing. The advocacy work is continuing.
And there's a lot on the recommendations that are in progress. The report was going to be way too hefty, so there's a lot of work going on. And as you heard, like with housing, I didn't bother to input all of the great work that is being done, just because it's changing week by week. So kind of leaving the housing till after all of the meetings are taking place.
So as a former member of the panel that worked on the report that then handed it over to you, I'll just give some background to new members of council. So we identified as the London for All people have shown that poverty is a community issue. So we identified immediately that was not something that City Council was going to solve. So nobody is patting ourselves on the back, I can assure you, because we also recognized that once the report was done, as far as getting the recommendations going, it had to be out living in the community. It couldn't live in City Hall. A part of that as well is because we know that they need to advocate. And it would be putting staff in a very awkward position to hand them the report and say, implement this report, and then they have to turn around and then advocate to us more than they already do for their particular areas of expertise. But it was recognized, and it was strongly recommended from within the community as well, that this reside in the community. So it really did complement the definition from the very beginning that poverty is a community issue. Regardless of what party is in power at which level of government, the advocacy will always continue and is a necessary part of this. And finally, during our work, we had many conversations with other communities that have implemented poverty reduction strategies, notably Hamilton, Halton area, and the Halton Roundtable. The Toronto, I sat for an entire day with the late Deputy Mayor Pam McConnell, who led the Toronto Poverty Reduction Strategy. Theirs was a 2-year work plan. We did ours in 7 months. So, and then we gave a considerable amount of work to the London for All team. So we saw the experience from other communities that had gone ahead of us, and we see that it is ongoing. So Hamilton region, their initial poverty reduction plan was written over 10 years ago. And the work continues. The roundtable continues to exist. There may be new players coming in all the time, but they're continuing to do the work, which is what these people are doing. And there's no accident that they have the leadership table, but feeding into the leadership table are the accountability tables. And that's important. That word is deliberate. And I know Ms. Riddle helped to set this all up. She was the project manager for getting this implementation body off the ground. And the accountability table specifically means that they are accountable for the recommendations that have been assigned to them. So each table has a set of recommendations that they are accountable for moving forward. And they take their roles very, very seriously. I know that. So again, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the work that you do, and we're looking forward to more updates and more news coming forward. Poverty is never going to be an easy issue. It's never going to be completely solved, but we do recognize as well in the plan, the goal was a generation. So we certainly don't expect after just a few years, 3 years, that it's mission accomplished. So we have a motion to receive. It's on the floor. It's been moved and seconded, and we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So committee, we're a little bit behind. We have a timed item for 12:30, which is a brief staff presentation about the Parks and Rec master plan. We also have some members of EPAC that are present. Are they presenting as well, Mr. Stafford, or is it just you?
Through the chair, I believe VPAC would like some words as well as Accessibility Advisory Committee.
Okay, so we'll go ahead with the timed item. After that, we have two more delegation requests, and I see that the members are in the audience. Sometimes we decide at a meeting to approve that delegation for a future meeting. We don't currently have agenda items for the July meeting, so there's a possibility that there may not be a July meeting, so I believe it would be best to hear the delegations today. But let's go with staff and the Parks and Rec Master Plan, which is item 3.3. So we have staff presentation and also a delegation from EPAC and a delegation from the Accessibility Advisory Committee. So lots of delegations today. Go ahead, Mr. Stafford.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm going to be very brief. We'll reduce our presentation a little bit here. So we're presenting the update of the draft of the Parks and Rec Master Plan today. We started the project in early 2018 along with the consulting team of Monteith Brown Planning Consultants, Tucker Reed and Associates, and Swern Consultants. It's our 10-year plan for parks and recreation, programs, sports services, and facilities, and a longer-term outlook for major capital projects for up to 20 years. I just want to take this time, too, to thank all of the staff, partners, stakeholders that have contributed and will continue to contribute to the plan as we implement it through the many years ahead. Thank you.
Councillor Sally.
So happy to move the motion, and just real quickly to staff, was there anything in the plan that you would have liked to include that would allow you flexibility and not having to come back to council with certain things in the future? I just want to ask because I know I'm usually the person calling Parks and Recreation out of the blue, so.
If we can get ultimate direction to Ms. Livingston and I to implement anything, that would be great. But I think he probably didn't want that carte blanche. So no, I think it's an extensive plan that allows going forward, and certainly with budget constraints, there's going to be business cases coming forward that deal with some of the gaps in service that we have and some of the larger projects that we have going forward. So certainly you'll hear more from us as we go, and we appreciate your input. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So it's been moved by Councillor Sally, which is the staff recommendation that the above noted plan be adopted, civic administration be directed, seconded by Councillor Lewis. But let's first hear from our delegation, I believe Mr. Levin from EPAC.
I'm here, there we go. I'm here with the other two members of EPAC, the Vice Chair, Susan Hall, and Randy Trudeau. We were the working group that prepared comments for staff, and we want to say we appreciate the involvement of EPAC in this process, and thank staff for coming to EPAC, also setting up a meeting with myself and Mr. Stafford and Mr. McPherson to talk about our comments. We believe you should move forward with this. We suggest a Clause C, and I've also discussed this with Ms. Madden from the Accessibility Advisory Committee, that there be ongoing consultation with EPAC and the Accessibility Advisory Committee as the plan is implemented. I had a chance to run into Mr. Stafford this morning, and he is comfortable with that recommendation as well, that it be added. We do also suggest, and again, I don't think this should impede this moving forward, but a glossary in the document would be helpful. There are references to other documents, but it's always helpful to have that handy. And again, in talking with Mr. Stafford, I don't believe that is going to impair your moving forward with the adoption today.
So I'm seeing from the mover and the seconder that a Clause C is acceptable, that there be ongoing consultation with EPAC and ACAC. And a glossary. Any, Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a great thing that I'm seeing come back. I've been waiting to see this for a while, and I can say that I've actually bumped into staff doing some consultations at a couple of our different community facilities while this was out for public consultation and feedback. I'm really excited to see a number of the things that are presented in this plan. I frankly think that we need to find you more money to fund some of these things that don't have capital costs included as well. And when I look at things like on page 496, when we refer to the number of basketball hoops that are going to be needed in the community, I think after last week, we may need to up that number. I think that there'll be a lot of young people who are going to want to be able to go out and play basketball. I look at the importance emphasized in the report of the Aquatic Center and making sure that it's a facility that's capable of holding provincial and national and even international events. I think that perhaps in your haste to prepare the report for us, we missed the paragraph in there about the importance of having Wi-Fi in that facility for those level of events. However, I'll leave that for a future. I know this is a draft, so taking a look at this, one of the big takeaways for me, colleagues, is the fact that there is not sufficient funding for the regeneration of existing park infrastructure in our neighborhoods. And I was really struck by the age demographic data that was in the report. And as we see more established neighborhoods have a higher proportion of youth, the teenage bracket, the newer neighborhoods have a higher proportion of young children. And as these neighborhoods age, the needs in our parks are going to change as those demographics change as well. So I think as we see business cases come forward in the multi-year budget process, I would really, through you, Madam Chair, encourage staff to not be shy about telling us what you need for regeneration in terms of funding, because I think maintaining our neighborhood parks are a really critical piece. I saw the note of expanded senior satellites. Again, that reflects our changing demographics, and that's a very important thing. I certainly have a great number of seniors who appreciate the senior satellite programming that's available at the edge of my ward at Trinity United Church. And I know that if we had expanded that service elsewhere in the East End, there'll be uptake on it. We have seniors out there who are looking for things to do. So I want to thank staff for the great detailed report here. I know that people in both the Northwest and the Southeast are going to be delighted to see that the medium-sized community center facilities are on the list, and that those actually have capital funding attached to them already, so we will be able to do those. I just want to commend staff. In particular, on page 412, it mentions references including climate change planning in our new builds. And I know that the East London Community Centre, we've taken some steps to make sure that there's some permeable surfaces, some water catchment facilities to make the drainage issues better. I know that the same thing has been done at Bostwick with the bioswales there. You know, our council recently passed a declaration that we're in a climate crisis. Staff is already planning for green technologies to be implemented in our community facilities moving forward. And I also want to draw colleagues' attention to page 516, the importance of the municipal accommodation tax spending on sports infrastructure. And I know that there's a recommendation coming to corporate services tomorrow on the municipal accommodation tax, and it actually re-emphasizes the importance of putting this money into funds that could be used for leveraging improvements to recreational facilities and things like that. So there's a lot of important things in here. I know that this was a very thick agenda this week, so I wanted to draw colleagues' attention to those kind of things. I did want to ask, because I didn't see it, and again, it was a thick report, so I may have missed it. Through you to staff, during the public consultation process, do we have a number on how many individuals participated and provided feedback to us on this plan? I know it was a lot because I attended several of them.
Through the chair, I'll defer to my colleagues that have that information behind me. Ms. Baxter, I believe. Oh.
Pleasure to be here before you. We're part of the author team with Monteith Brown Planning, and we had led a lot of the community consultation. The number that you're looking for is over 2,500, many of those engaged. at both phases of our consultation through surveys, many in-person events as well, and online and through various events.
Thank you for that, and I hope that you didn't count me 3 times, because I'm only one person. And I just want to finish up by noting that Ms. Oldman's here as well. And then the community movie nights, we had one scheduled this weekend in our park that got rained out. But those are an important component of how residents are utilizing our park spaces as well. So I think that the entire Parks and Recreation team deserves huge thanks for the work that they've put into this plan. And hopefully as a council, we can find the money to make it happen for you.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to go to the other delegation first, or next, because Ms. Madden is here and she's been waiting, so come and go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. From ACAC, we're in the process of changing over our committee. We have our first new committee meeting in a couple of weeks, but I was the chair of the past committee. Thank you to Scott and Donna and Andrew. They have involved us in the process all along. And I really think that the language and the direction is consistent with the feedback that we gave you along the way. So we appreciate that. And we appreciate you taking time to come to our meetings and our subcommittees. So we do feel like we've been involved. I think I just wanted to call attention to a couple of things. The number one thing that I believe was that they heard in the community feedback was that we want walkable paths and nature trails, or however that was worded. And I think that that is consistent with what we heard in our open houses 2 years ago from our committee, or our community, that we wanted walkable spaces. And so when you're looking at these and planning these, we just ask that we remember that it's access for all, and so we're looking at all of these to be accessible. Another thing is playgrounds. You know, playgrounds, when you think of playgrounds being accessible, you think of for the kids, but it's also for parents and for grandparents, and who take the kids to the parks. And surfacing is always the biggest issue with playgrounds, because really the only truly accessible surfacing is rubberized surfacing, not wood chips that tend to be the more economical thing to put down. And the problem with that is that it's a big financial drain to put in rubberized surfacing. So, you know, we're hoping that we, you know, come together and think outside the box on how to get this done by either corporate partnerships or community agency partnerships, to try so that when we upgrade parks or put in new ones, that we're doing it properly, and that we're not taking that shortcut, that we're putting the right thing in the budget so that we have the proper surfacing. The other thing is I recognize that this is a big, high-level thing, but we have lots of other documents to look at when we're doing these things, from our very own FADs to our guidelines for developing ESAs, to our city's accessibility plan, and to remember that all of those documents as well govern what happens in the Parks and Rec. And then our last thing was, I was going to say that if we continue to work together, you know, with staff, with EPAC, with us, I'm sure we can come up with good workable solutions for all of these things, and we appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Madden. Anybody on committee? I just want to say, good job, great report. I've always been really proud of parks in London, and I know in Ward 5, we have some really great parks, and I was actually going to touch on partnerships in 2 of the parks that were recently upgraded with the Optimists. And so they provided funding to the city so that we could take those 2 parks to the next level. So the Constitution Park, and then the Fanshawe Optimist Park. It used to be the Fanshawe Optimist Little League Park. So perhaps some of those issues like rubberized surfaces could be it could be the upgrade when we're working with community partners that are willing to help fund those kinds of things. So it's really good, and looking forward to the sport park that's coming in Ward 5 too, which also addresses the issue of diversity and how we're doing some recreation programs a little bit differently because of our diversity. So we're going to have a cricket pitch up there on the Adelaide Sports Fields. Name is actually pending on that, right? So we have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. Any other comments or questions? No. Thank you to our delegates for speaking to us today. Thanks to staff, and we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we'll move to items for direction, keeping in mind, committee, that we still have some consent items that we haven't taken care of yet. So the first one is 4.1, which is a delegation request on the impact of social assistance changes on the community and the City of London budget. And we will be hearing from Mr. La Liberté, formerly of St. Patrick's High School in Sarnia, Ontario, former classmate of mine. Can I have a motion to accept the delegation request? Moved by Councillor Sally, seconded by Councillor Hillier, and we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Go ahead, Mr. La Liberté. You can go straight to the mic. You want to come down?
Yes, I have a little bit of a PowerPoint.
Okay, come.
It'll be brief. I'm not like most lawyers.
You come down. Can we vote on the other delegation request while he's making his way down? Yeah, okay. So the second delegation will be the impact of cuts to legal aid on the community and the City of London budget. And it is L. Burns and C. McMullen. And I will look for a mover, moved by Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. And we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So our delegation should be arriving soon. Matt, are you ready for his PowerPoint, or is he bringing it? Go ahead.
Thank you for allowing our delegation status today. As Maureen said, my name is Michael Liberty. I'm a staff lawyer at Neighborhood Legal Services. I've been with the clinic for approximately 30 years. Neighborhood Legal Services is a poverty law legal clinic. We serve London and Middlesex County. We deal mostly with housing and poverty law issues and employment law issues. We have provided a written submission that I hope you had an opportunity to review, outlining a number of ways that the provincial budget negatively impacts our community and especially low-income individuals. And I am here today to talk about two upcoming provincial changes that will negatively impact low-income people and on our community. Today we heard quite extensively the housing crisis London is in, and the changes that I'm talking to you today about will add to the housing crisis and poverty issues in London. You also had a presentation from London for All, which I am part of one of the tables. And unfortunately, many of the recommendations that were checked off, that was incremental steps that we had with some success with the last provincial government. But a lot of those step forwards, now we're going backwards. And these are two that are really going backwards, and we're asking for your help in trying to change the mind of the provincial government on these two issues. The first one is changing the definition of Ontario disability, what it means to be disabled under that program. The government has announced that in 2020, they're changing the definitions from its current one to a much more strict one. It's moving from how I explain it to my clients when they come to me, and they both have an Ontario disability and a Canada Pension Disability appeal. For Ontario disability, what we need to show on an appeal is that your medical problems prevents you from working for at least 1 year in jobs within your abilities. Canada Pension Test is much stricter. You basically have to show that your medical problems prevents you from working at any type of job, basically for the rest of your life. So it is, this change will negatively impact many of the people we help get on to the Ontario disability system. I asked Ontario Works for numbers per year that go from Ontario Works to Ontario Disability. I don't know the exact numbers, and hopefully staff can give you that. But just from our office, and I know there's a couple of other offices that deal with this issue, we filed 200 to 300 appeals a year on this issue. Already by the end of May, we filed 110 appeals denying Disability Ontario. On average, we win 75% of those appeals. The reason we win the appeals is that we are able to show that, yes, these people are not disabled for life, but they cannot work for the next year or so because of their medical problems. Those appeals that we're successful on will likely not be successful in the future. So, and who are we talking about? Mostly we're talking people with mental health issues. People with depression, PTSD, anxiety. They're not able to work. They're trying to deal with their problems. They're trying in treatment programs. They're seeing psychiatrists. They're trying medications, but presently they can't function in a workplace. So we get them on Ontario Disability with a 2-year medical review saying, okay, you can't work now, but come back in 2 years. And then we'll see how things are progressing. If you're not progressing, you remain on the system. If not, it's time to go and get a job. So our fear is that change, it's going to impact the Ontario Works caseload. You're going to have hundreds of people who presently go on to ODSP remaining on Ontario Works. These are the clients that are going to need the most of a lot of resources. And most of them will not be able to function in the workplace. And you saw the slides earlier today. Why is it important to get them from Ontario Works to ODSP? Well, you saw how much you get on OW as a single person, $730. On ODSP, we can get that up to $1,169. So it makes a big difference. And plus, there's additional benefits if you're on ODSP. There's basically no dental coverage when you're on Ontario Works. If you're on ODSP, you have dental coverage. You can see a dentist. You can deal with your teeth issues. And one of the things that I found the most outrageous is to expect people dealing with significant mental health issues, trying to deal with those issues on the meager money they get from Ontario Works. This is what this government is saying is, oh, we're giving you $730, try to find housing, try to cover your basic needs, and also try to deal with your significant mental health issues. So that's the first issue I wanted to bring to your attention, that this will cause more people staying on Ontario Works. It's going to cause a lot of our community partners resources that they don't have to try to serve these people more because they're not on ODSP. The second big change that I wanted to talk to you about, we understand that this one will take effect November 1st. And it is going to impact, from the numbers I got from an Ontario Works manager, on an average month, it's going to impact 200 families and about 400 children. And what that is, it's $220 per child that will be eliminated from these families. And what that is over the last decade or so, the provincial government has taken basic needs for children on OW and ODSP out of those programs and put it into child tax benefits. So there are certain groups of people who are not eligible for child tax benefits. And so that's what this transitional child benefit is. It is to replace child tax benefits you cannot get. The largest number of people who are going to be impacted by these changes are people who are applying, for example, to become convention refugees. If you're applying for a convention refugee, that takes a year or two. You're not eligible for the child tax benefit. So currently you get the transitional child benefit of $220 per child. This government has decided that they're no longer going to fund this program. I understand that for the City of London, it was $2 million in this benefit were paid out last year. Where are these people? I know Crouch Resource Center is asking for an emergency meeting next week because a couple of families were inadvertently cut off from this benefit early by Ontario Works. They were reinstated, but they're going to say, how are these families supposed to survive, cover their food, cover their housing, when the money for their children is being taken away? Again, it is a horrendous decision that we're asking your support to ask the government to review that decision before it takes place. Because you're going to have 200 families who are not going to have money to feed their kids. How are they supposed to find housing? It's already hard to live on Ontario Works when you have the child tax benefit coming in with you. Now they're expecting these people to survive without that. So in my submission, I asked for a resolution from City Council to contact the Premier and Ministry of Community and Social Services Minister and request that these two decisions to change the definition and to end this program be reviewed and rescinded. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Salee.
Madam Chair, and just through you, not declaring conflict yet, a pecuniary interest, but just on the matter where we're talking about the convention refugees and immigration statuses, my employer is the federal government. I just wanted to flag that depending on what the motion is. So I only voted so far, so it's clear. So to hear the delegation request. So obviously I can't predict what the delegate was going to say. So I'll kind of wait to see how the conversation goes, but I'll have to remove myself if we're going to talk specifically about the immigration statuses and those pieces.
So their request is to address specifically the Premier of Ontario. Would that still?
So my concern is that, because we're talking about the immigration status and the convention refugees, right? And the benefits that they would get. And then that, in theory, having a conflict with my employment. So I have to kind of wait and kind of see how the conversation goes, but I just wanted to flag that just in case if anyone's following from home.
Okay, and so for your, whatever, you could turn to page 552 in the agenda and see specifically what request is being made of this committee. And you can just look at that. And in the meantime, I'll go to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our delegation. First of all, I certainly understand changing the definition of the disability. Prior to my time here, I worked as a public servant in the federal government, and I know how much more difficult it is to qualify for CCPD than it is to qualify for ODSP, and that the Canada Pension Disability is intended to be permanent, that you're never going back to work again. ODSP is not so restrictive. So I certainly understand, and I could support that part of the resolution. My concern is the second part, and it's not that I would argue that these families don't need benefits to help support their children, but, and with apologies to Councillor Saleh because I might trigger his conflict here, but immigration is a federal matter, and the province does have financial challenges of its own. So why ask us to lobby the Premier to reverse the decision on this child benefit? Why not focus the lobbying effort on the federal government to extend the Canada Child Benefit to children of convention refugees as well? Because to me, I think what we're asking is for the province to fill a gap left by the federal government, frankly.
Okay, we are in the process of also challenging the federal government, but these are people who are waiting to be found convention refugees, so they're in the system and have not been found eligible for convention refugees. So this program that the province is eliminating, and it's been in place for 10 years, at least, no, 20 years? No, 10 years, sorry, 2008. And just because there is a kerfuffle between the province and the federal government that may not be resolved anytime soon, currently the province has stepped up to the plate, and then for them to walk away now while they try to hash it out with the feds, you're putting all the onus on the families to try to live with this change. So in the meantime, while the federal government, the provincial government try to work out their refugee and immigration issues, it does not seem fair that the Ontario government take a benefit away that's currently there that they have supported.
So Councillor Sully is recusing himself.
So yeah, I just want to go on record. I'll recuse myself because I don't want to get too further into the conversation. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments from committee? Okay, so our delegate has a request for a motion, and I'm looking to committee to see what you want to do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be prepared to move the draft resolution with respect to the changes to the definition of the disability. If colleagues want to vote on, if colleagues want to include both, I would want to vote on those separately, but I'm prepared to move the first portion of the draft resolution.
Okay, so that's been seconded by Councillor Hillier. What I would like to do is ask staff. So we have, I know, different pieces of legislation have been introduced or have been changed at the planning level, the Planning Act. There have been changes and lots of stuff happening there. And staff have been deeply involved in conversations with the provincial government on those changes and providing input all over the place. So to staff, is similar stuff happening around any of these items that have been brought forward today?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. I think it's probably fair to say that we have a very active and ongoing engagement with our colleagues at the Ministry of Community Social Services, Children, Community and Social Services. Thanks, Mike. And so I'll start, and I may ask Mr. Dickens to provide some additional feedback with respect to that. I do think that these are decisions that have been made by the provincial government as it relates to the definition of disability and also the changes around how they're going to fund it. We have a relationship with the regional offices. We actually have opportunities to have discussions across the province with our colleagues as well. These, I guess if you're asking what our ability is to encourage them to make some different decisions. We certainly have the ability to do that, but I would suggest to you that councils, in their role as governance of the responsibility for the work that we do, also has a capacity to do that. And I'll pass to Mr. Dickens if he has anything else to add.
Through the chair, I think that would be fairly accurate that since November 22nd, 2018, when MCCSS announced they were launching their social assistance reform plans, we have been waiting for details of what some of those plans might be. We see impacts to funding changes such as the TCB, the Transition Child Benefit, coming to fruition, and they've put a timeline that those changes will come into effect November of 2019. There have been recent examples where heavy lobbying and support from the municipal sector has reversed some changes. So I would echo those comments that at a governance level, there can be an opportunity perhaps for some greater impact.
So the motion is on the screen and available for committee members as well, that the mayor be requested to advise the Premier of Ontario and the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services of the City of London's request that the province review and rescind the decision to change the definition of disability in the Ontario Disability Support Program Act. It being noted that communications from M. La Liberté, Neighbourhood Legal Services, and Abe Outshorn, London Homeless Coalition, with respect to this matter, were received. How's that? That's good. So it's moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Councillor Sally, just saying, if you want to look at that motion, this one does not touch on the convention refugee issue. This is only about the Ontario Disability Support.
Out of an abundance of caution, I'll still recuse for now, and then I'll come back at council at that point after I consult if need be. So I'll continue to recuse because my employer is the federal government, and there was a lot of talk about funding and change of hand with money and advocacy on the federal issue of who pays for what. And that's my employer, so I'll be safe on this one.
So my question to the delegate is regarding the transition child benefit, since Councillor Sully is recused, can you just reiterate, you mentioned in your presentation that it provides support to those who are sort of in limbo as applicants for convention refugee status. Who else benefits from this transition child benefit besides convention refugee applicants?
Yes, I should have mentioned that. It's not only people in immigration situations. It's also people who are having difficulties or a separation from a spouse and who is eligible for the child tax benefit. And if one person gets it and the other person says, no, it should be me because I have the child most of the time, while that's being disputed, that person can get the transitional child benefit. Another example is you have a new baby, you have to file the paperwork. That could take a few months before the child tax benefit kicks in. So again, you can get the transitional child benefit. A third one is, unfortunately, some people, because of mental health or addiction issues or whatever, don't file their income tax returns in time. So again, the transitional child benefit would kick in for a number of months before Ontario Works or ODSP can help the person get their taxes done and have the child tax benefit reinstated. Another example is if you're working at a factory, you're making good money, and you don't get child tax benefit because it's based on your income from the previous year. You have a significant change in your job status and income, so you technically are not eligible for the child tax benefit because it's based on last year's income. But you can ask for exceptional circumstances to get child tax benefit because of a change. But again, that takes a number of months. And again, the transitional child benefit is there to help you while that process is happening. Should have mentioned all of that. It's not only those with immigration issues, but that is, I would say, the largest number.
So basically, it's a stopgap measure while people are waiting to be approved for the child tax benefit.
Or appealing a negative decision that they're not entitled to it.
Any comments from committee? Any desire to address the second part of the request from the delegation? Councillor Lewis.
Again, Madam Chair, through you, I'll just say, based on my previous experience and child tax benefit challenges were certainly the bulk of the casework with Canada Revenue Agency. With all due respect to our delegate, I'm going to disagree that it takes a long time to settle these. It was my experience through an MP's office that these can often be settled in a course of 2 or 3 weeks. And again, I think we're being asked to step in and encourage the province to fill a gap created by the federal government not sorting out its own business on the Canada Child Benefit. And I just don't think it's our role as a municipal council to be the referee between a disagreement between the feds and the province.
Okay, so we'll vote on this, that the mayor be requested, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, don't mean to diminish that, but et cetera, et cetera. Then I will rescind the chair and hand it over to my vice chair, and I would be prepared to move the exact same wording and then talk about the transition child benefit. It's a communication to the premier. It's expressing something that will have an effect on the people that we serve when we're delivering provincial services here in London. I'm not sure if the $2 million is that Mr. Laliberte mentioned. Actually, maybe I'll get a comment from staff because I saw some faces that there was some uncertainty about a reduction by $2 million based on some of these changes.
I was told that's what was paid out by Ontario Works to people on getting the transition child benefit in the last 12 months.
So if staff heard that in the last 12 months,
Through the chair, thank you. Yes, in 2018, we issued roughly $2 million directly to clients in the TCB benefit.
okay, so we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded, and we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4 with 1 abstain.
So before I abandon the chair, I guess I should check and see if anybody would be interested in seconding that other motion. Again, it's a letter to the Premier's office and the Minister's office expressing concern about a change that they are implementing in the transition child benefit. So I'm looking at committee. Anybody interested in a second on that? Councillor Pelosa? Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. So, yeah, I see no problem. We've been doing this, as I said, at Planning Committee a lot, directing staff to communicate with the Premier's office or a minister's office to talk about proposed or impending changes to the Planning Act or other legislation. I have no problem asking the mayor to write a letter about this proposed or pending change and just advising them of the effect it's going to have in London on Londoners. And I'm pleased that Councillor Pelosa is willing to second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer, and I was happy to second this, to have the conversation, to hear Councillor Cassidy's concerns about why. I'm mindful in asking another level of government to keep picking up the slack when someone else downloaded something onto them. We find ourselves in that position a lot lately, in my opinion, municipally. And I'm hesitant to do it because it sets the tone of, yeah, it's okay, just keep absorbing what's not yours to do. Certainly recognizing as a mom and knowing the impact that these dollars have on families and that everyone has to transition, and some people definitely need help with the paperwork, and when things get difficult, some things always fall through the cracks. But still leery on the wording of rescind. If there was more favorable wording of, we highly encourage you to work towards a resolution or support this, because this is the impact it's having in London, who's already having a housing crisis. In addition to addiction issues right now in the city, we're just in a very precarious situation.
Thank you, Councillor Pelosi. Councillor Cassidy.
So, Mr. Presiding Officer, I'm happy to play with the wording there. And I'm also, perhaps it may be helpful to also send the letter to the federal government and ask that the two levels of government work together to resolve this issue.
Well, I will say I would feel more comfortable if we were sending a letter to both as well.
Right,
from the
okay,
chair,
so
but-
if we were to address the letter to both levels of government, and our role, just as Mr. La Liberté's role is one of advocacy to this level of government, that's one of our roles, is advocacy towards other levels of government on behalf of people of London.
Okay, we'll ask everybody to just give us a moment here while I check with the clerk on what she's got for wording. Okay, the motion's up on the screen now if people want to take a quick look at it.
So the motion's on the floor, we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0 with 1 abstain.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, now our second delegation is L. Burns and C. McMullen from Neighborhood Legal Services. Welcome. I forgot to tell the other delegates, you're supposed to have 5 minutes to present your information to us. I've been a little bit lenient today, but welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we'll be a little bit more brief than my colleague Michael Liberty. I want to thank him actually for introducing Neighborhood Legal Services and what we do. I don't have to do that now. My name is Chelsea McMullen. I'm a licensed paralegal with Neighborhood Legal Services. We are the legal aid clinic which services London and Middlesex County. And we're here to talk about some of the cuts that came down in the 2019 provincial budget. Some of you may or may not be aware, legal aid is facing a 35% cut this year. That amounts to $133 million. within the next 3 years, we're expecting that cut to go up to 45%. I do also want to point out how disproportionate this cut is. Legal Aid Ontario makes up 20% of the Ministry of the Attorney General's overall budget, but this cut is actually over half of the cuts that the ministry is facing. We've already seen this year the impact of some of these cuts. Luckily, Neighborhood Legal Services was able to absorb the cuts without seeing any reduction in frontline services this year. But looking at some of the clinics in Toronto, we're sort of expecting to see those types of cuts coming next year and the following year. Specifically in Toronto, we've seen some of the specialized clinics facing large cuts. So just for an example, the Advocacy Centre for Tenants of Ontario is facing a 25% cut this year, and the Income Security Advocacy Centre is also facing a 25% cut this year. More close to home, Parkdale Community Legal Services, which is not a specialty clinic, it's a neighborhood clinic just like ours here in London. They're facing a cut of $1 million out of their total $2.3 million budget over the next 2 years. So that is quite large. And again, those are cuts that we are expecting to face here in London within the next couple of years, which, you know, we do want to point out there's no way that we would be able to face cuts like that without having a significant impact on the frontline services that we're able to provide to the citizens of London and Middlesex County. And really what this means is that low-income Londoners will be left without legal representation. And some of the things that we specifically help them with are eviction hearings, disability hearings. And we've already heard today, you know, about the housing crisis that we're facing here in London. And, you know, we've heard as well from Mr. LaLiberty the difficulties that our clients will be facing with the potential change in definition to disability with their disability hearings. So really what that means at the end of the day is it's already going to be harder for them. And without our help, it's going to just be that much harder. So we'll see more Londoners who are accessing housing services and also accessing Ontario Works. And something that I think I just really want to drive home is that for every $1 spent on legal aid services, we're saving $6 in other areas. So it's a really important thing to spend money on because it really helps people in other areas of their lives, maintain housing, access disability programs that they're entitled to. And so I'll turn it over to my colleague Lawrence here, who will talk a little bit more about that.
Just briefly, so I'm a staff lawyer at Neighborhood Legal Services, and we're dealing with the kinds of cuts that affect Londoners down the road, so housing. We also deal with employment, and I know a big concern in your strategic plan is sort of growing the economy and having a strong workforce, but it's one of the, you may have seen an article recently in the Star just on the weekend about the cuts that have been made to the Employment Mobile Legal Support Network in our region, or that could be faced by them rather. That so the kind of work we do as a community legal clinic also grows the economy. It's not just helping people find housing, but it's also helping people advocate and work. But also in terms of some of the provincial government's statements about legal aid, they've said that there's less clients that we serve, and that's not true. I included in the submission stats around the increasing amount of service we provide. Just there was some adjustment because we had a new computer system that made it look like there was reduced service in the last year, but that's not true. Also, as Chelsea said, it's good value for money. I know that's a concern for the city, that the short-sighted approach of the government is trying to save money on the backs of the poor and the working poor and the disadvantaged, and that's just going to download costs to the city, and you've talked about that, and I agree that the advocacy you can provide, just in providing letters of support and kind of think again, that's kind of assistance we're looking for. I know other city councils have done that, specifically around legal aid, so Toronto, Peel just passed one, Kenora and Fort Francis, Ottawa is soon to vote on a similar resolution, and so we're hopeful that taking all the two related submissions that we made, we've divided them up, but taking the scary issues that have emerged in Mr. LaLiberty's talk and realizing that the clinics like ours are the ones that can help prevent the damage that occurs as a result of some of those denials of disability or wrongful dismissals or evictions. So we ask that you do provide a similar resolution to the ones, hopefully less controversial than the ones that Mr. Liberty presented, asking the province and the Attorney General in particular to commit to promoting access to justice, respecting the commitment of the government not to decrease frontline service, which we are, and to reduce or reverse the cuts to legal aid. And that's our submission, so happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Committee? Councillor Sully.
Just for clarification, so I'm also recusing on this for similar reasons. I know one of the points talks about applying for immigration refugee status and challenging deportation orders. I know that wasn't any mention, but assuming that's the work that could be done and the funding that might be related to that. So I'll err on the side of caution and recuse.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our presenters. I just want to get an understanding because the resolution, and it may be intentionally vague, when you talk about point number 3, reduce or reverse, obviously in an ideal world, you wouldn't want to see any cuts. But if we're talking about reducing the cuts, I just wonder what that looks like to you. What do you see as changes that may be reasonable to some degree? I mean, I understand that, you know, all of these are going to have an impact, but when you talk about reduce or reverse, there's 2 options there. What do you see reduce looking like potentially?
Yeah, so reduce, what the government's introduced as a multi-year progressive series of cuts. And the first cut, we were actually quite taken surprised by. We watched the budget get released and we saw, okay, budget cuts coming 2021. And then we learned that the cut's actually retroactive to April 1st, so some of the ones. So our clinic has come through pretty unscathed for the first year, but we're really worried down the road that the cuts are going to not just reduce frontline service and staff, but maybe even the very nature of the clinic system as a whole. So reduce at a minimum is to, I guess, roll back no more than the cuts that have already been implemented. So the cuts that are coming down the road are increasing each year up to maybe 45% in 2021. So at least go no further at a worst case scenario, but if cuts have to be made, we accept that there can be cuts and there are efficiencies. And the clinics have been working alongside Legal Aid Ontario generally. And just to be clear, the clinics don't do immigration, like we don't do immigration work, but the clinic system is part of Legal Aid Ontario as a whole. So they've been trying to find efficiencies, as they call them, within the budget. And so we can certainly do that, but the multi-year levels and the deeper intensification of the cuts, that's what we're interested in. So reversing partly relates to that promise to cut further, but then also, because we've had increases to our budgets the last few years, right? So we accept that there's room to move, but so I don't have to get more specific to.
I think partially what I want to point out as well is that really within Legal Aid Ontario, the types of things that the legal aid clinics spend our money on, we really spend our money on rent, on paper, and on personnel. There really isn't a lot of room for us to find savings and efficiencies, and I know Lawrence talked a lot about that, but there really isn't a way for us to save much more money without cutting frontline services, and that means, less Londoners receiving the help that, they should be getting when it comes to the justice system.
I know one of our board members, Deb Peckham, is here. She was here for another matter, but she wanted to just jump in on that briefly.
Thank you. I know I just kind of inserted myself into the conversation here. As I say, thank you, Lawrence. My name is Deb Peckham. I'm Vice Chair of the Board of Neighborhood Legal Services. As you are aware, as Mr. Liberté has said, and as my other colleagues have said, Neighborhood Legal Services is in dire straits. It's only going to get worse. And I really would like to look to City Council to help not only Neighborhood Legal Services, but the community as a whole. This is the only legal clinic besides up at the university, which is, takes forever for anyone to get the bus, to get up to, in order to receive any kind of legal advice whatsoever. And if the funding continues, we're going to be losing the only legal clinic that we have in London. And so I implore upon you to do whatever you can to help us. And I thank you for letting me insert myself, and I will now let you continue. Thank you.
So again, committee, we have a requested motion. If there's anybody want to move that, anybody want to play with the words at all, I'm in your hands. Perhaps part 3 could be changed to not making retroactive cuts or something like that. But thoughts? Councillor Palooza is putting the motion on the floor, and it is the wording as provided by the delegation.
I'd open it up to committee to amend and adjust the point 3 wording.
And I'm happy to second that. Councillor Sully, again, it's your call, but the delegation did say that they do not provide immigration services. Keeping in mind, committee, that we have more things to handle today, and we have a planning and environment committee meeting, a member of which I am, beginning at 4 o'clock. And the motion is on the screen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do struggle with the draft wording that we were presented, and so I've just been scribbling out some words here, and I want to see what colleagues think about perhaps some amended language, which I will then pass to the clerk to see if she can translate my chicken scratch. And that would be one, to change bullet point 1 and 2, where we'd actually be merging those to make bullet point 1 read, promote access to justice by ensuring frontline services are not decreased. And then 2 would be to review the time frame and targets for implementing reductions to Legal Aid Ontario. And perhaps that gives, maybe these reductions are going to take place over 10 years instead of 4, or whatever that might be. Again, I'm trying to leave it deliberately vague here as well so that there's room, but I just wonder what colleagues might think about that language instead.
So my concern with your proposed number 3, review timeframe and targets, seems to imply that we're okay with cuts as long as they take longer. And I don't think that changes anything for a clinic such as Neighborhood Legal Services. maybe even review timeframe and targets. I'm seeing, I've just, from hearing from the delegation, it seemed like they've been able to absorb the cuts that have taken place so far. So if we could maintain the current level of funding would be worst case scenario. Best case scenario would be not, would be reducing. And then middle ground would be, or I mean, best case would be reversing the cuts that have already taken place, and then middle ground would be not cutting anymore, or reducing the cuts that are coming. I don't know. Go ahead, Councillor Lewis.
So hopefully I can provide a little clarity. The reason I wanted to ensure that, and targets was included is because I think maybe in reviewing those targets, rather than, you know, a 45% cut, maybe they come back and say, you know what, maybe next year we can only manage maintaining services where they are. Now, the provincial government will do what it's going to do, but by saying reviewing the targets as well as the time frame, maybe the targets for cuts get reduced as well as the time frame lengthened. Maybe the targets don't get changed at all. Maybe the time frame doesn't get changed at all, but the targets get changed. I think by putting them both in there together, it's kind of a couple options available in your review process. So that's where I was aiming, but I understand what you were saying as well, Madam Chair.
How about, could we add it being noted that delegation from Neighborhood Legal Services presented information stating that future cuts, it would be very difficult to absorb any future cuts and maintain current service levels. Extremely difficult.
Don't know if you could add minimize in there somewhere. Is that touching on the same issue? Like, it's not saying never cuts, but we want to imply the cuts are negative, but
The clerks are going to put a possible motion on the screen for your review. Councillor Hillier?
Just curious, extremely difficult, should that be changed to impossible? Because from what I'm saying, I don't think we can do it with the cuts that they're making.
I would be fine changing that wording if my secretary is to, that it would not be possible to maintain current services should there be further reductions in funding.
I'm fine with that change. Councillor Lewis?
Sorry, we're wordsmithing on the fly here, but my comfort level with that portion, it being noted that it would be whatever we've changed it to now, next to them, not be possible to maintain current services. I feel like that actually belongs with the communication from Neighborhood Legal Services. By leaving it attached to the B clause, we're making a judgment call, I feel, on the likelihood of that possibility, when in fact we're receiving information from a community agency that is saying that's not possible. I don't know that we're in a position, not that I discount their expertise, but I just feel like that should be separated out from Part B, just as it being noted, that is all one being noted piece.
Councillor Pelosi?
Thank you to Madam Chair, and I feel like Councillor Squire is saying that I don't have the legal expertise to speak on behalf of someone saying it would be possible, and I'd be fine moving it to the expertise that we did get that advised us that it would not be possible, and moving that line to the further section.
So as far as wordsmithing on the fly, I know some councillors don't like that, but I would push back and say we're actually doing committee work at committee, so. If you hit current item and refresh your screen. So we have a motion moved and seconded. I'm not seeing any further comments, so we can move to vote. Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us today.
Did it?
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0 with 1 abstain.
All right, committee, let's not try to rush this, but let's go back to our consent items. Really brief, just a brief little intro from Ms. Daters-Beer on item 2.1, the funding coming through from CHOCI and OPHI.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will make this very brief. The province announced that there would be additional funding would come to us, and it's identified. We now have 2 new acronyms for us all to learn together. So the 2 programs are there. You'll find on, and I don't want to go too far into this, but you'll find on page 5 of your report the allocations we received. We received a confirmed allocation for 2019 and 2020, and then planned allocations for 2021 and 2022. There's an overview of the types of programs or the types of services we can provide with this funding. I will highlight for you page 9 of the report, or the page 9 of the total report, which identifies our plan at this point in time and how we'll use that funding. So the COCHI money will be used for repairs to support some of the work that we're doing in terms of our end of operating agreements with our agencies. And then the OFI money, and I apologize again for using the acronyms. As you can see there, we have been working in partnership with the Housing Development Corporation and have identified that the majority of the money this year and the plan for the years 2 and 3, which is certainly still open for further discussions, years 2 and 3, I should say, will be for the development of new rental affordable housing. So this gives you a sense of how we expect to use this money. We want, one of the reasons that we came to you, and Madam Chair, you asked this earlier, is we wanted to be able to be in a situation where we didn't leave any of the money on the table. So that's why this report is coming back to you as quickly as it is, with the intention that should you support it at council next week, we would then action it and hopefully get the money committed, or at least as much committed before the end of this fiscal year, and then come back to you at some point in time with a plan if it needs to change for year 2 and year 3.
Thank you. Committee. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to try and be brief on this one too, through you to staff. I certainly wish there was more funding available, and of course, I think we all wish that. With the OPHI, the Ontario Renovates, I'm glad to see we're projecting increases in year 2 and 3, because I think that this is a very important program. For the sake of colleagues and for those who may be watching, staff, can you indicate to us what kind of things would be eligible under the Ontario Renovates? Because I know this is with the goal of keeping people in their homes. So if we had, for example, a senior on a fixed income who needed to patch a hole in their roof, would that be eligible, or is this strictly related to accessibility issues?
Through the chair, I'll have Mr. Purdy speak to that. He deals with this.
Through the chair, thanks for your question. That does help address both seniors, the age in place, as well as accessibility issues for those with disabilities.
Anybody else? Awesome. Okay, so I'm glad to see this funding, excuse me, come through. I'm glad to see all of the options available to us as well. Renovating, repurposing non-residential to make them into residential units, housing support, because I know that was a big gap when, especially with LMCH, they were dealing with bricks and mortars, but they found more and more they needed to provide supports, which they didn't have budget for. So it's good to see all of this. It's good to see HDC and our team here at City of London working so closely together on that. And again, as mentioned earlier, we have a supplemental report coming to Planning and Environment to talk about some of the additional tools that we have available to us to deal with this issue here in London. So I'm not seeing any more comments or questions or concerns. So there's a staff recommendation. I'll put that on the floor and look for a mover. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier, and we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Moving to item 2.2, and the reason I pulled this and to give staff a chance to speak to us is because we often hear, about housing and homelessness, usually here and there, with a lot of space in between the reports. This current situation, we're hearing about it a lot more, which is a really good thing. But I know in the past, staff have been asked before, so what's going on? What's happening? What are we doing around homelessness? It doesn't feel like we're doing anything. So I want to give staff the opportunity to give us this update here.
Thank you, through the chair. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the midst of renewing or reviewing our homeless prevention and housing plan. And in doing that, we've had an opportunity to get information from stakeholders, both external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. And as teams at the city, we also decided, further to the chair's comments, we really needed to put as much information as we could into a report, so you had a sense about what we're doing on all, in all the areas. So the latter pages of this report give you a full overview of the work that's being done across different parts of the corporation around a number of different issues. And so we wanted to be able to provide that to you and give you an overview of the work that's being done. We're happy to continue to update you, but primarily our work right now is around updating the homeless prevention and housing plan, and then working with our colleagues in planning. As you know, there's a tools report that's coming forward in an hour and a bit, and then we'll also be coming back to you with many other reports, including the recommended changes to the homeless prevention and housing plan later in the fall.
Anybody? Questions, comments? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hopefully we're doing committee work at committee here. And I will seek some guidance perhaps from you and staff as to whether this is the appropriate place to insert this, but I think this is the appropriate item on the agenda based on the earlier delegation that we heard from Ms. Wills and the state of homelessness and housing crisis in the city. And I do use the word crisis deliberately because I think it is a crisis. I wonder if this might be an appropriate time to ask that, or to move that staff be requested to report back on the backlog of vacant unit repairs with a financial cost and possible sources of funding to address those repairs before the end of the calendar year to the next CPSC. I will pass the wording of that along, and I'll just sort of maybe provide hopefully a little clarity to staff in terms of what I'm asking for here, and they might provide some wording massaging here. If we had an unlimited pot of money, what would you need? Basically what I'm asking is, what do you need to fix the vacant units? I know we have units that are occupied that need repairs as well. I know we have buildings that need upgrades to HVAC systems and things like that. But in terms of units that are simply sitting vacant right now that need repairs before we can put people in them, how much money do we need to get those units online and get people living in them? And I know you don't have to have that. I don't expect you to have that number right now, but can you get that number back to us for our next committee meeting?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a number of housing providers in this community, and I don't mean to repeat that over again, but we have 60-ish, one of them the largest being London Sex Community Housing. So the driver of where the vacant units are and the fixing of the vacant units, which I don't have those numbers, and I don't want to speak on behalf of LMCH, but we can certainly get those numbers, relates to the largest landlord. I'll be frank about that. So we have been in discussions over the last number of months with LMCH about vacancies and how to address those vacancies and how to get that work done. We're happy to take this back. I don't have those numbers right now. It involves not only the resources from the monetary perspective, but also the resources of being able to schedule the work, get the work orders in place. We've been working with LMCH around a work order process and making sure that they've got support to do that as well. So I'm happy to take the resolution. We might just need a little bit more time to think about what that means in terms of dollars. The money might be in the system to do it at this point in time. It's kind of the balance between trying to make sure the repairs are done, as also looking at the broader piece of renew and repairs in the future as well.
Thank you, and I think that's exactly what I'm looking for. I never expected you to have the numbers available today. I didn't expect to be putting a resolution forward today, frankly. But hearing what we heard earlier and knowing that there are vacant units, if there is something that we can do, even if we're drawing down from a reserve fund to get some of those units filled with people who are on the wait list, I think it's incumbent on council to try and do that. So if you can help us with some information on that at the next committee meeting, I think that would really help inform our decisions moving forward.
So I have a question related to that, Councillor Lewis. So we have shareholders meeting coming up June 24th with LMCH and HDC, and I'm wondering if any of that information might be included in their reports.
And through the chair, the benefit of having those two organizations sitting here today, I'm sure they've heard you ask for that, so that's great.
So we have the staff recommendation, and I guess, is that a separate motion, or are we going to include that as a Part C? Okay, so we have a new Part C. I'll read it to committee that staff be requested to report back on the backlog of vacant unit repairs with a financial cost and possible sources of funding to address repairs before the end of calendar year to the next. So is it next CPSC or is it
to
calendar
report
year?
back to our next committee meeting with the goal of trying to get these work orders and these repairs started by the end of the calendar year. To be ambitious, to try and fix as many of these as we can before the end of the year.
Go ahead, Ms. Datersbeer.
Thank you. Through the chair, we can certainly report back. It's certainly not an issue reporting back. I just want to be clear that the housing is provided by organizations in this community who have their own boards as well. And so we'll need to respect that the boards of those organizations and their administrative staff will take on that work as well. So we're happy to report back, and we will get as much information back to you by next CAPS as possible.
So that's moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. If there are no other comments, we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Awesome. 2.3 is another item I pulled again, just a brief staff comment. There's so many changes happening at the provincial level, and this is a significant change, possibly, to how we do things here in London. So just looking for staff to talk a little bit about that.
Through the chair, I think it's time you hear someone else's voice. So I'll pass to Mr. Dickens.
Through the chair, thank you. Yeah, this is an exciting time in Ontario Works across the province. We were notified back in February of this year that there would be an employment transformation where all of the employment services that are provided under ODSP and Ontario Works would be transferred over to Employment Ontario. As a municipality, as a service provider of Ontario Works, we've been actively engaged with the Ministry of Training, colleges and universities as part of their market sounding day back in May, and keeping very close tabs on any new information that comes out about this transformation. We're putting forward this report, because we feel as a municipality and as a delivery agent that works really well with vulnerable populations that we should and have a duty to participate in the service system manager competition, and we feel like we would do that really well.
Thank you, and I don't doubt that. I know our staff do some really good work. Any questions, comments from committee? Oh, okay. So we have staff recommendation, and I'll look for a mover on that. Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Hillier. We can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we have item 2.5, which is London Strengthening Neighborhood Strategy and Neighborhood Decision-Making Program, and that was pulled by Councillor Lewis and Councillor Pelosa. Who wants to go first? Councillor Lewis.
We're just, Councillor Pelosa is just pulling up the correct page for her to start. I'll let her go first.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, thank you for your patience. It was definitely a robust agenda this week. In regards to the neighborhood decision-making, I want to thank staff for hearing our concerns about how the program could operate better and coming back with this report so efficiently, and giving us the information to make an informed choice as we move forward. My concern with it is mainly part B of seeing what staff is anticipating of the increased funding need to implement these changes. And quite pleased with the reduced amounts that a group can apply for, addressing the need for someone maybe not to take it all. And realizing that this is the year of the program, that it was gonna wait to finish up until we had the full review of how everything was working, and hoping that we could seek consensus to lower the amounts before we seek to chop up all the geographic areas this year. going forward, keeping in mind that the programs needs to be rolled out right away, that I know I certainly have community members excited for it and waiting for it. And it would just be a very complicated process, in my opinion, at this point, to say what the different areas would be, especially recognizing my ward would be chopped up into different segments as well, which would make my message a little bit harder to get out to my residents.
Councillor Lewis.
Well, I will echo the sincere thanks to staff for how amazingly quickly they turned this around. And I think that it's important everybody knows that I think we're all in agreement that this is a great program for the city. I think that it's very clear that at the costs that are being projected to divide up the geographic areas, regardless of whether we went to 6 or to 10, are a negative impact on making changes this year, especially when we see in this report the plan for an enhanced outreach strategy in neighborhoods that have under-participated in previous years, that there's a communication strategy, the idea improvement process has been improved as well. I still think, and I mean, this was the one that I put forward, and staff indicated that this is very quick to turn around and has no additional impact, that we should in fact still put in the safety net that says we can't have a project go in the same residential address 2 years in a row. I think when we look at the maps, it's very obvious that there's not one of these 5 geographic areas that only has one public space that funding could be spent in. They all have multiple locations where this funding could be spent in. At the very micro neighborhood level, it may not feel that way to folks, but I think when we look at the realities of the map, that's clear. I think in future years, we do need to look at perhaps realigning the boundaries of the 5 areas, because there's some big population disparity between Councillor Pelosa's area, Area 4 with 97,000, and my area, Area 5, has 68,000. That's quite a gap. So, but I think that that's a discussion for the future. I think that we have to get ready to roll this out now. I think staff have given us food for thought for future improvements, but the enhanced outreach strategy and the limiting to we're not going to put anything in the same address 2 years in a row is a good place to start with the tweaks, and let's see what the results of that are with the community after this year's process. And then if we need to revisit boundaries, we have time to do that in a more comprehensive way and work with staff to perhaps sort out some of the population disparities as well. I would say to my colleagues as well, when we talk about the caps, and I don't know if people took a look at some of the projects that have been funded in the past. I certainly did. There was a swing set in the Springbank area last year that was $15,000. So if we put a cap of $15,000 on projects, you're basically saying to people nothing bigger than a swing set. So while I understand what people are seeking in terms of bringing in a cap, I would be reluctant to embrace a very restrictive cap. There's $50,000 available to each area. We've only had, from what I can see, and through you, Madam Chair, I might ask staff if they can confirm this, only one project in all 5 areas in the last 2 years has used up all the funding, I believe, and that was the Ninja drop zone thing that they did out in the Northwest, I believe, and that was the only one that used up all the funding. Is that correct?
Through the chair, in 2017, that's correct, we had the Ninja Warrior course in Northwest London for $50,000. And in 2018, in Northeast London, we had the Cedar Hollow Public School Outdoor Classroom and Nature Place Space, which was also $50,000. So one project per year.
So given those realities, I think if we're saying we're not going to add to the Ninja Warrior Zone because they won last year, although I know that was actually 2 years ago, or we're not going to add to Cedar Hollow because they won last year. I think that's enough of a check for now. This program's evolving. We're only 2 years into it. So I would encourage my colleagues to leave the program as is with just the addition of the restriction of the address for this year. And let's see what comes out of this year's results before we judge whether or not we have to break up the areas.
So I wonder if Councillor Lewis, you would take the chair again.
I'm getting my steps in today. Counselor Cassidy.
Thank you. Okay. So I supported this report, and I thank staff for turning this around so quickly. I know you're under pressure. If we're going to actually start this for the next year, we have to actually start it. So I do know that you had to turn this around really quickly. But thank you for indulging council and looking at other ways that we could do this. I'm going to repeat something that I've said before. We've only been doing this for 2 years. We did have a pilot year, which was in Ward 7 and 6 or 13? 7.
Through the chair, it was 1 ward and 1 neighborhood. So we also did it in the Medway neighborhood.
So I want to give some context there as well. I believe 1 physical location got the grant in the pilot year and then in a subsequent year. But I also want to point out that it was St. Andre Bessette School, and in their second time getting the award, they actually put in a project for a different area. They technically won the school, but they put it in a lower income area in that ward. So, which shows a level of altruism and community mindedness in high school students that is commendable. And so if we do make this restriction, we have to look at unintended consequences, because technically they were the winner of the grant. That was their physical location. They chose to use the money in a different area. It's been a 2-year project so far, program. I'm not keen on making big changes after such a short time and seeing how it could work. I know Councillor Morgan was the one spearheading this with staff and came up with the pilot project in the first place. And he made a very good point at council last time and talked about a district park. And I have a district park in my ward. It serves a very large geographic area. A lot of community coming together happens at that park. And so there may be different community associations or different neighborhoods or different groups of people that come up with an idea and they want this something implemented in this district park. We're serving a very large community, and I really don't like the idea of putting limitations. And again, we developed this program, staff developed this program to be community driven. And so I'm very reluctant to say to the community, come to us with your ideas, and then putting a lot of barriers in place when it should be the ideas coming from the community. So when and I want to talk about the issue of under participation as well, or all the money going to a more affluent area. So first of all, it's only been 2 years, so we really don't have a long time of data to see if that's really a problem. We're fixing a problem that we aren't sure actually exists. And then I'm going to turn this back on us. The onus is on us. We're representing our areas. So if I know, for example, in one part of my ward tends to get a lot of the grant money because they have better organization, they have better networks, they have skills, they have resources available to them to get the vote out or whatever they need to do. I'm putting the onus back on us as councillors. If that's happening in my ward, I should be going to a school in an area that needs help. And I should say, hey, principal, hey, vice principals, hey, students, get some ideas. You have some ideas? Let's brainstorm. Let's work together. Okay, now here's what you do to get the vote out. Get your school community working on it. Hey, you have a computer department, or you have an area in the library where there's computers. Give your students the opportunity to head down to the library and vote while the vote is open, while they have that opportunity to do that. So we as councillors have some responsibility here to make sure that our wards, our areas are are equally represented in this program, that they're getting access to this program the way other neighborhoods might not need our help. So I'm not interested right now in splitting up the geographic areas. I think we can do more work and better work on helping the areas that need help. I'm not interested in limiting the geographic area or the physical location, the physical address. I'm not interested in making those two changes right now. Unlike Councillor Lewis, I would be interested in a cap. But if committees, I'm not sure where committee is on any of these things. So at this point in time, we could split this motion up into A, B, C, D, and E. And I would like to move A, civic administration be directed. See, I'm not sure how committee's going. So I'd like to say that no changes be made to the program at this time as A. So forget about the D and E. A, civic administration to continue with the program as is with no changes at this time. And that eliminates B and C as well. So that's my motion. I don't know if anybody wants to move that or wants to second that, but that's what I'm prepared to move.
Councillor Sally, were you seconding, or did you want to speak to the, okay? Councillor Sally. Sorry, one moment. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Cassidy's motion? Okay, seeing none yet, we'll go to Councillor Sally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I can appreciate Councillor Cassidy's words, but I just disagree. I mean, I think when I look at the geography and just, I look at the same thing with how people vote in different neighborhoods, and we know historically neighborhoods have been carved up and cut up in certain ways. I'm not saying that's the intent of the staff for this council, but when we recognize there's a challenge, and I'm almost certain that regardless of me going out and telling other people in different neighborhoods, because again, as I mentioned before, the BCOC kids were out there, they voted, they did what they could, they just can't compete. There's just the economics, the reality of their parents being free to take them there with shift work and working. There's other dynamics and other factors for them. Their parents having a language barrier, not understanding that their kids want to do those things. There's just too much. So I'm prepared to move, at least for this year, to look at the geographic area. So I'm not sure where my councillor colleagues are on whether 10 or 6, option 1 or option 2. For me, option 1 and 2 both address the concern in northeast that I found was a challenge, and I'm looking at Argyle and looking at the area that I represent, and I find that kind of addresses both those. So, but I recognize that obviously that creates a lot more work for staff. But for me personally, in the area I represent, I feel both of those geographies address the matter. So I'm happy to move option 1, 6 geographic areas, but I'm amenable to go to option 2, which is the 10 geographic areas, just depending on what my colleagues say. But I'll put that motion out there for now and see where we get.
Well, just as a point of clarification, Councillor Sally, because I was a little confused as well as the clerks. What were you proposing to move? And I will just state for the record that the Argyle area actually let the Northeast have funding last year from our pool because we recognize that FDR school benefited both your area and our area. So we were happy to share the money with you there.
So no, I was on, what page is this? Geez, there's no page number. On page 6, I believe it is, where you have the geographic areas in the option 1, and there's an option 2. I was suggesting to move to a motion to support option 1, which is the geographic area. But I said in my notes that because obviously option 1 and option 2 are similar to, essentially for my concerns, but I was amenable to option 2 if my colleagues wanted to head that way. So I'll just move that. If there's not a seconder, then it is what it is.
So Councillor, the staff recommendation, instead of saying what the options are, it just says 10 geographic areas, cap the funding at 15,000, and an idea cannot be submitted back-to-back years. So are you okay with the back-to-back years thing and the 15,000, and all you want to change is London be split up into 6 geographic areas? Is that what you're proposing?
So I can appreciate that staff has kind of created the motion for us, but what I'm just trying to do is make it easier because I keep hearing different things and I don't know where everybody else is at that thing. So I was just trying to at least address the geographic question.
Okay, so we'll have a standalone motion right now on the floor, not addressing any of the other things right now. And your standalone motion is that London be split up into 6 geographic areas.
But as I was saying, like, I'm fine if someone wanted 10 because it addresses both are the same for me, for my geographic area.
I'm actually not seconding this. I just want to clarify. I think what Councillor Sally is suggesting is that he wants to amend the staff recommendation, Part 2, to read 6 geographic areas, and then Part B would find the funding amount of up to $47,000, and that's from the option listed on page 321 of our first section of our agenda.
So, Councillor, I think what the councillor wants to do is go bit by bit. So I think we would deal with B after we decide, and then he technically wants to split A up. And he only wants to deal with that one sentence, London be split up into X number of geographic areas. So he's looking for consensus on that. He's prepared to move 6, but if he can't find support for 6, he will support 10. Okay, so before we actually go with the motion, let's leave it as is for now. So we seem to have some consensus on 10. Do we? Do we need to vote on 10 separately? Okay. So let's start with a motion that says civic administration be directed to make the following changes. A, London be split up into 10 geographic areas. It's been moved by Councillor Sally and seconded by Councillor Hillier.
I know it sounds silly, but just to clarify, it obviously will add in there that this is specific to this program, not for any other geographical purposes for the city.
We'll tie it all together with a bow at the end, Councillor Sally. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, I'm going to encourage you to defeat this motion. What we would be talking about if we do this is adding $67,000 in costs to the program right now in a year where we are already struggling to find money for everything that we need. We are also reducing the amount that each geographic area would receive to $25,000 because $250,000 divided by 10 comes out to $25,000, not $50,000. And while I appreciate the struggles of different neighborhoods, Councillor Cassidy and I are not that far apart on this issue. I would say it's incumbent on us, and with, I don't mean any offense, but with the mover and the seconder of this motion, you both have amazing social media presence. Use it. Motivate your people. Get them out to vote. Be a champion for one of those projects. I would sooner make no changes than divide up into 10.
And just a reminder, or to build upon that, they don't have to live in that neighborhood to vote for that idea. Okay, the wording should be on the screen. There are no more comments. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion fails 2-3.
Okay, so let's go with the next possible change. How about this? An idea cannot be submitted for the same address in back-to-back years. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Sorry, Councillor Pelosi, he got his hand up again first. Okay, so Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll speak to this one very quickly because I want to clarify. When we talk about the same address, that doesn't prevent, for example, the students from St. Andre Bessette from submitting another application to do a project at yet another park in their zone. And I will share with you, the Argyle Community Association, 2 years ago, we had a naturalized playground in Kiwanis Park approved. And there was already talk about, well, what else can we put in Kiwanis Park this year? And my response to them was honestly, folks, we need to spread this around our district a little more. Yes, Summerside got the lion's share of the funding last year. This year, let's look at, you know, the kids who are requesting a basketball court in Grampian Park, or let's look at some of these other things that maybe didn't win last year, but are still very good projects that maybe people want to resubmit. And when I had that conversation with the community association, they understood that, oh yeah, well, okay, it doesn't all need to go into Kiwanis Park. But that's an example of people who are willing to hear that message. The reason that I want to support restricting money being spent at the same physical address is not to prevent groups from applying year after year with good ideas, but just to ensure that the funding within the districts that we have today isn't going to all be spent in a single district park. And like you, I have a big district park that lots of groups use. But I think that if we say it's okay to spend in that park consecutive years, it could be 3, 4, 5 years in a row. And then our smaller projects in our little neighborhood parks won't qualify for funding. I know that this hasn't been a big problem yet, but I see this as a safety net so that it doesn't become a problem. It's great that the students from St. Andre Bessette put their second project into another location, and I'm happy that the Argyle Community Association is going to look at another location to champion besides Kiwanis Park this year, but we may not always see that goodwill, and I just want to put this in there as a safety net, so that's why I'm proposing this.
Anyone else? So I'm just going to repeat, I think the program's new. I think there've been limited applications, at least in the first year, as people started to get to know and learn about this thing. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So I'll be voting against this change. And with that, I'm not seeing any other comments. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-2.
Okay, that leads us to the final proposed change, cap funding to an individual project at $15,000. Do I see anyone moving that? Councillor Pelosi? She's moving it. Is anybody seconding it? I don't see a seconder. Councillor Pelosi.
A question through you to staff. I know we had the conversation of a funding cap. There's 15,000 as a suggested cap for 10 projects, a 20,000 cap projected for 6.
Right now we're at 50.
Yeah, on average and the max was 50. On average, a lot of the projects seem to have been able to be done for 25,000. I know basketball courts are a big ask I have for amazing that basketball right now, but that's a big question for Ward 12 residents right now. On average, like what was the winning project's median cost?
Through the chair, the median cost in the last 2 years was around $17,000.
Yeah.
So I would like to amend that motion to, we'll just, either 20 or 25,000. Because I think 25,000 would also get you a volleyball or basketball court, so. I would see your 30,000 as a cap, Councillor Lewis.
What's the motion, Councillor?
30,000 cap.
Who's your second? Okay, moved by Councillor Pelosi that funding a cap funding to an individual project at $30,000. Moved by Pelosi, seconded by Hillier. Any other comments? No. So we'll take that to a vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-2.
Okay, so what that will look like then when it comes, I suspect, to council is that on the recommendation of the managing director of neighborhood, or I guess it's not necessarily on that recommendation anymore, so we'll scrap that wording. It will just be, the following actions be taken regarding the neighborhood decision-making program. Civic administration be directed to make the following changes to the neighborhood decision-making program for 2019. An idea, I guess it could be an idea cannot be submitted for the same address in back-to-back years, and cap funding to an individual project at $30,000. And that's it. There's no additional wording to that motion, and we're all good. Okay, so with that, we can move on to item 4.3, which is Affordable Housing People's Forum on Housing. Note, a petition signed by 122 individuals is on file in the city clerk's office with respect to this matter. So there's a letter in our agenda on page 562 of the original agenda. And they're making a request of city council. So it's up to committee to decide what to do. We can receive this for information, or you can devise a motion if you are feeling inspired. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to all of the work and the service review that's happening in housing and everything else, I think I'm going to move to simply receive the petition at this time.
Councillor Pelosi? Councillor Pelosi is seconding that. Okay, and I'll call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Brings us to the deferred matters list. Do I have a mover to receive that? Councillor Lewis, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment. I do want to actually move that staff be requested to provide an update at the next Community and Protective Services Committee meeting on item number 9, the towing services review, to let us know where they are in their consultation with stakeholders on that item.
So item 9 on the deferred matters list, Councillor Lewis is making a motion to direct staff to provide us with an update on item number 9 on the deferred matters list. Do you have a second? Councillor Hillier is seconding that motion. I'll put that to a vote. The motion's on the floor, we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And now I'm looking for a motion to go in camera. It's on the public, sorry, we have to receive the deferred matters list also. Moved by Pelosi, seconded by Lewis.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Now we need a motion to go in camera, and it is on the public agenda, solicitor-client privilege, litigation/potential litigation, a matter pertaining to advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, litigation or potential litigation, and directions and instructions to officers and employees or agents of the municipality with respect to the 449 Hill Street demolition project. Do I have a mover? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosi. We can call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So we will be heading to committee room number 3, and the committee will adjourn from there.